From the John DeVita Recording Studio, located in an undisclosed and clandestine location on the great northwest side of our fair city of Chicago, we once again are pleased to be presenting yet another edition of our monthly roundtable panel discussion show, Meet the Chicago Historians. Now here's the guy who started it all, John DeVita.
Well, thank you very much, Rich. From the John DeVita Broadcast Center, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another broadcast of Meet the Chicago Historians on the Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network on Monday, May the 21st, the year 2018. Today, the panel will be talking about Hollywood history, the story of our country on the big movie screen. So sit back and enjoy Meet the Chicago Historians. And to start today's broadcast, here's our announcer, Mr. Richard Lang.
And let me present today's moderator, John Kochalko.
Thank you very much, Rich.
Damn.
This is John Kochalko here, John S. Kochalko. I will be your moderator for today's broadcast. We have to announce that our regularly scheduled moderator, Jack Red Ryan. We like to always mention that the red does not in any way reflect his political point of view. But Jack Ryan cannot be here with us again this month. We hope he's recuperating, a little bit under the weather. We hope he's feeling well. We may hear from him. I have it on high authority. We may get a phone call from Jack Ryan in the course of our broadcast today. But in any event, we're here. We're on a rather chilly and dismal day. I once said, back when we were doing the old WJJG, I said that this is the kind of day that you'd like to team up with, Nick Charles and Sam Spade and put on your trench coat and go out and investigate a mystery. It looks like just the weather that would be perfect for a murder investigation with a couple of the greatest detectives of all time. So we're very glad to be here. We're here at the John DeVita Broadcast Center, as we are each month. And we'll be talking to you about our topic, about Hollywood history, but also we always kick off with a little bit of a discussion of what's in the news. But before we do that, we like to go around our table here. We're deep in it. Don't look for us. We're in an underground bunker at an undisclosed location. It's highly secured. I mean, concrete and steel, and we're in a very safe area. We're well protected, sentries and guards. So don't come looking for us, folks. Right. You'd never locate us.
Cats.
Yeah, the John DeVita Broadcast Center is one of the most secure spots on the North American continent. But what we would like to do, we got a call. We have a call coming in, ladies and gentlemen. We've only been on the air for a few minutes, and we already have a call coming in. So let's take that call.
Hello.
Caller, would you identify yourself?
Is this Channel 11 Pledge Night?
Yes, it is. If you pledge $500.
Hi guys, it's me. I'm sorry I couldn't be there. I really planned on it. It's a favorite topic. Movies and history together. So we have. And how is everybody doing?
Real good,
Jack. Hey, Jack, how are you doing?
Well, thank you, Rich. What do you want this in alphabetical order or what? Over the weekend, my leg swelled a little bit, and the other night my wife just looked at it. I didn't even get out of bed yet, and I couldn't hardly put any weight on it. So travel was out, the doctor said. So sorry.
Well, we're sorry you can't be here today, Jack. This would have been a great topic for you.
Yeah. Who all is there now? Well, do your roll call, why don't you?
Well, you had the bad taste to interrupt us just as we were about to do our roll call. So I
want to be part of it. I get paid for today, right?
Okay. Would our telephone caller please sign in? Come in and sign in.
This is Jack Ryan, erstwhile, or whatever that means, erstwhile MC, BMF, WIC. I'm the big guy, Big blank. What's in charge?
Okay. And let me now turn
to John, of course, John DeVita.
Let me turn to the gentleman on my left, and we'll go around the table with those who are actually here, who actually showed up for the broadcast today. Let's start off with the gentleman here to my left.
All right, thank you, John. Don Figuarelli, the Don of Sports. Happy to sit in for Big Jack. Looking forward to the subject that you guys decided. So,
All right.
thanks for having me.
Thank you. And now our announcer.
I'm your announcer, Rich Lang. I've got a background in teaching American and European history, and more recently, thanks to our great Ken Little, a big part of the show for many years, I've become interested in Chicago history, neighborhood history. And I'm also involved in a group that recreates old-time radio shows, which is a lot of fun. No memorization required.
Do you have any of those coming up?
I'm drawing a little blank. No, not until about August. We got about a 3-month hiatus until August.
Now cut that out.
Well, excuse me.
Where is Don Wilson?
How do you do? How's that one?
Oh, the Mad Russian.
Oh, the Mad Russian, yeah.
Yeah, when we were active in World War II, they insisted that they only call him our Russian friend because of the alliance.
Interesting, of course.
Isn't it?
No.
Gee, Mr. Benny, when do I get to sing?
Oh, was it Eugene
Dennis.
McNulty? That was his real name, Dennis Day?
I doubt it.
That was his real name.
Are you quite sure,
Eugene
Jack?
McNulty.
No kidding.
McNulty.
McNulty, yeah.
Yeah.
It was very Irish, yeah.
He played that kid role forever, didn't he? Like the dumb kid role.
Oh, yeah.
I think he was still in his 50s and he was portraying.
He had his own television show and radio show for a while.
Yeah,
He
for
did, yeah.
quite a few years he had a radio show.
I think you're
yeah.
right. Mm-hmm.
He
Day in the Life of Dennis Day.
That's right.
Something
That
like
is
that.
right.
7 or 8 kids, I think, too. You know. Well, it was Irish family, so.
And I think we do have one additional member of our panel, one of the newer members of our panel. So would you please identify yourself, panelist?
Oh, okay. Now I got to remember. Oh, Don Peter.
The memory ace.
Yeah, either that or I forget stuff a lot. I don't know. But yeah, I'm fairly new. Well, 73 years old, if you call that
Oh,
new.
gee.
But
What an old guy.
I lived in Oak Park. Lived there for a while. Messed around. Knew Kenny Little. We got along real good.
Oh, you were a friend of Ken Little's.
Yeah.
Oh, we miss Ken Little. He was a
Sure do.
great member of this.
Yeah, we miss Ken. Ken was
Yeah.
like the heart and soul of the group.
We will never forget him.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
There was a guy to go to. He knew every street in the city, where it was, how
yeah.
long it was, alternate names.
yeah.
Plus,
on
there
the
was some
six-
experience with the fire alarm office, you know.
On the 16th, we're having a fire. Not the museum, but
The Fire Museum that
No,
Kugelman's involved with.
the
No,
the
no,
muster.
no.
Muster.
And that's going to be.
Oh,
and
yes.
That's
Yeah.
going to be in memory of Kenny Little.
Is it?
It'll be 24th, I believe.
They
At the
have
Fire
every,
Academy. They
every
had them other places.
Fourth
before,
Saturday, they're
but
open house there.
That's
too.
coming out in June. June the 16th.
June the 16th.
June the 16th.
Saturday
June
before
16th.
Father's Day.
Oh, is that the next one?
That'll be the annual. That's a great event, ladies and gentlemen.
I
It's
gotta make it.
the
So
annual.
who are you
muster.
doing the honors today? What is your name, sir?
We're at an undisclosed location, so today I'm forbidden by the rules to actually disclose my identity. Suffice it to say that I am the announcer for today's program, and
Dave,
my
what's my
name
name?
my
Has
name is
Mystery
a
Challenge
highly
got a
guarded
mystery MC,
federal
right?
secret.
That's right. Federal Protection District.
Well, go ahead. I'm listening.
That's
I'm
right.
listening.
And perhaps our producer, our executive producer, might like to identify himself as long as we're doing the round robin here. John.
Yeah.
Hey,
Come on, John. Don't be shy.
Okay, I'm John DeVito, and I'm the leader of the group. I'm the head of Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network, and I'm with radio station out of Norwich, Ridge High School, WRHS FM 89.7, and WRWX 88.1 on the FM dial.
Very good.
And you're the guy. You got so many people interested in this.
And
I
I'm
remember when I first met you. You
and I'm
were always
also
a good talent scout like that, looking out for people
Yeah.
to recruit.
And I'm also past president of the 511 Club of Chicago. And just like what Don Peters was just saying, on June the 16th, which is a Saturday, we'll be at the Chicago Fire Academy doing our muster.
Oh,
And
that's okay. Good.
That's every year. And I'm there on Friday afternoon with my partner, Bob Holmes, and my pal who lives with me upstairs, Oscar Ramirez. And we're there. We wire up the fire academy. We set up a big PA system over there. And I've been doing that for the past 18 years or better.
Now,
But,
is this all outside activity?
Yes, it is.
basically,
Yes,
right?
it is. The parking lot, what it is, the parking lot of the fire academy where people would come in and park. We closed that parking lot up, and vendors come in and sell fire-o-matic items. And what we do is this is all a fundraiser. We charge the vendors a certain amount of money, and they set up their tables, and in the spot where you would normally park your car, they set up their tables, and they sell all kinds of fire-matic items. Like they'll sell T-shirts where they say Chicago Fire Department on it, sweatpants, little fire engines, and anything to do with the fire
Books
department.
and magazines.
Yeah, anything to do with the fire department,
Right.
they
Like
sell.
movie materials,
Yeah.
like from Backdraft or
Yeah,
something like
yes,
that, too?
yes,
or-
yes, yes.
Yeah,
And
probably.
we also at 9 o'clock Saturday morning, at exactly 9 o'clock, we have what we call a bell ringing ceremonies. And the firemen from the Chicago Fire Department, they have a regular fire bell, and they have a moment of silence, and we remember all the firemen who have passed away, and they ring the bell when you go out to a fire, and you return to quarters. They used to, when they had the telegraph system, the officer would tap on the teletype key 335. So 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 5. That tells Ken Little and his group up at the fire alarm office that particular piece of equipment is back in service. And we do that because the person who had passed away is back in service with the good Lord.
Oh, that's great. Yeah,
And then right after the bell ringing ceremonies is over with, we have a parade. And
Oh, that's what I was going to ask you.
yeah, okay. The 511 Club, there's two organizations that run this muster. The 511 Club, we work directly with the Chicago Fire Department. We have 2 canteen trucks, and we go out and serve coffee and donuts and food to the police and the firemen.
Now, you know what? That's how we met. Didn't even know it.
That's
in
right.
January of 1968.
That's
freezing
correct.
cold fire was 47th in Indiana.
Yes, right. That's where Jack and I
I was there
met there.
directing traffic. I was a rookie.
Absolutely right. Now, the other organization that's partnered with the 511 Club is called the Fire Buffs of Illinois. Those people are interested in buying fire apparatus, old retired fire apparatus, and they take and they restore it. They take the equipment and they restore it. They bring it back up to the way it was when it first left the factory. And at right after the bell ringing ceremonies, they have a parade, and anybody who buys or has these old apparatus, they go around the block and have a parade, and everybody can the kids can jump on and go around the block, and they have a parade for everybody, and it's a very, 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 very nice event. Then after the parade is over with, then the vendors open up their doors and start selling their items.
And
So
believe it or
that
not,
brings me to my next question. Would the 2 grandsons appreciate this a lot?
Oh, most definitely.
4-year-old and 6-year-old?
Yep, definitely.
Yeah. So I'm going to try and get them down there. I've been trying for a couple of
Yeah.
years, and
Okay,
I think they're about the right age now.
the fire academy is located right on the corner of Jefferson and Taylor. It's between Jefferson to the west and Clinton Street to the east, and Taylor Street is on the north side of
That's
the
the Colvin
academy.
Street, correct?
Yeah, well, the Colvin is where the front door of the academy is, but
Yeah.
the main intersections is Jefferson and Taylor.
and
Now,
John,
interesting, I worked with a guy, Joe Constantino. He lived there as a kid. There was a apartment building right there. I guess it was their house. And his name and the whole family was in. There's a book published in the 40s from a series of articles in the Daily News called the Houses of Chicago. And Joe passed away last year, and His name was young Joey. Young Joey was his name was mentioned in there. So when we found the copy and gave it to him, I remember that.
Now, not only does the 511 Club work with the Chicago Fire Department, like I said, as soon as the chief in charge of the fire hollers out, battalion or division or whatever his rank is, give me a 211. As soon as he mentions the word 211, we are out on the street with our canteen trucks, bringing in the summertime like now, we'll be cold water, iced tea, Gatorade, and anything cold. Yeah. And then in the wintertime, we have hot chocolate, hot coffee, tea, and whatever. So we kind of go with the season. Now, just recently, in the last couple of years, not only is the 511 Club involved with the Chicago Fire Department, but now we got involved with the Chicago Police Department. Now, if they go out on a swap meet where they got some idiot that's going to lock himself into a house and they're going to be there for any length of time, again, the 511 Club will go out there with the canteen truck and serve refreshments, cold, hot, or whatever, and we'll be there as long as we are needed.
When you have a hostage thing, a barricade thing.
Yes. So we are for the guys, the firemen and the policemen in the city of Chicago, and a good part of that was my idea, especially with the canteens.
I just got one question, John.
Yes.
About the mustard.
Yes.
What if you don't like mustard and use ketchup instead?
You get thrown out of the place.
That's a felony in Chicago.
I have to break in. If Tom McKenna is not here with us today, but if Tom McKenna were here, he would at this point say that he is a personal friend of Jack Ryan and one of the very few who is willing to admit it.
Yeah. At the Mustard, gentlemen, we do serve refreshments. We have hot dogs, which is donated to the 511 Club or to the Mustard, because I can't say the 511 because we're two organizations. But he donates over about 400 or 500 hot dogs with all the trimmings, the onions, the tomatoes, the buns, everything. But the one thing he does not do, and it's a sin, to have ketchup.
I thought it was a felony.
I know, it's Dirty Harry said so.
And then we have other people that donate water, donate pop. And because we sell that in the lunchroom, and all the profits that are collected for this mustard, both food and rental of the space where they set up, that money is divided between the 511 Club, and our money goes to the canteen service to help replenish for food and refreshments for the truck, and then the other half goes to the Fireboats of Illinois.
Right.
So how many years have you been doing this now?
I have been doing it for about 18 years, wiring up the academy. I've been a member of the 511 Club for the past 58 years.
So it was there before 18 years ago. So
it'll be 24 years ago that we started at the Fire Academy.
Oh.
They had them a few years before that. But something else you're not going to believe, we're actually going to provide, or the state of Illinois is going to provide free parking. I know a lot of people don't believe that in this day and age. But it'll be half a block north of Taylor Street in the state of Illinois parking lot. Actually, it's IDOT, but you'll be able to find it.
Okay.
Well, gentlemen, I'm going to sign off now. I'm glad everyone made it that did, and thanks, Don.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
I know. See, we gained Don as a participant in the studio, but lost him as a phone call. So I'll pretend I'm you. Okay.
Well, thanks for
and all the best, Jack, regarding your health.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. We hope you're feeling better.
Thanks, otherwise, I'm not doing bad. Oh, John, one more question.
Yes.
Hello?
Yes. Go ahead.
Is there a website or something to go to get information on this muster or no?
Yeah.
I tell you what, Jack. I don't have the literature here in front of me. I'll give you a call on the landline. And I'll give it to you.
Oh, if you have, you could put it out. Put it out there too. So.
Yeah.
I'll
give
thanks
you.
a lot.
Okay.
Hey, gang.
And
see you next time.
Best of luck to you, pal.
Take care,
Thank
Jack.
you.
Take care, Jack.
All right.
Always take a look.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
That was Jack Red Ryan,
Yeah.
and so we thank him for calling in. John, I just wanted to add, you had mentioned about having ketchup there. I have heard I've never actually seen it done, but I have heard that there are misguided people who do use ketchup on hot dogs.
Yes, yes.
That's allowed in kids under 10 years old.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah.
After that, it's a felony.
Yeah.
I guess to accommodate those folks, they feel it's necessary.
Jimmy's Hot Dog, which is located at Pulaski and
Grand Avenue.
Jimmy's Hot Dog. He donated since I've been involved with this muster. He has donated every year about 500 hot dogs. This year we cut it down to about 400 hot dogs this year. But he gives us the hot dogs, the buns, the onions, the relish, the mustard, cut up a tomato, and the whole 9 yards. He does that every year, and he's quite a fire buff himself. In his backyard, he's got a couple fire engines that he's in and that he owns. So, like I said, I've been involved with the 511 Club for 58 years, and there's two things that's the love of my life. Nothing else interests me other than being with the Chicago Fire Department and doing radio broadcasting like we're doing right now. This is my life.
It's your show, John.
This is my show.
And you've done a great job for both.
Yes.
Since I became acquainted with John DeVita at the old WJJG, I've attended the muster several times, and it's a great event. I hope the weather is good because it's mostly outdoors. Mm-hmm. And one other thing that they didn't mention, they have rides. They usually have a vehicle there where people can take a ride, and they take you out on sort of a tour of the neighborhood, and they show you some of the old firehouses, some of which have been converted to other purposes now. And it's a very interesting tour. I did the tour one year. And, John, isn't it also true that the Fire Academy is on or approximately at the site of Mrs. O'Leary's barn?
It's on the site, John. It's on the site right. of where the Great Chicago Fire started.
And there's a memorial there.
Just recently, within the last couple of months, they put a big memorial up right in front of the front door of the academy, and there's a lot of names on that monument. And outside the front door, also they have a flame that's lit up at nighttime. It's the flame representing the Great Chicago Fire.
And also, if you remember your history, you know that Mrs. O'Leary's barn was on DeKoven Street, and what I understand from John is that little stretch where the Fire Academy is the only remaining portion of DeKoven Street that still exists in the city of Chicago.
The address is 558 or
558, 558.
DeKoven Street.
John, do you know they're in the process now of proposing or planning for an expanded police and fire training center. Do you know what that will mean to the existing fire academy? Have they talked about
Bye.
It'd be the property is getting so valuable there. Where they're going to build it is what on
someplace out on the west side somewhere.
Yeah.
I can't.
It's about 4000 west, I think.
Yeah, on Division Street, isn't it?
Just thinking, because of the history of it, I hope they keep that little stretch of DeKoven Street and keep the shrine and because they shouldn't just pave that all over and put up a high rise. It would be that's part of the city's history.
Well, if you go a little bit north of Taylor Street on Clinton, there's a couple, 2 or 3 streets that are left that are actually
cobblestone.
They're not cobblestone, they're still
close. They're brick streets.
They're still the streets,
brick streets,
as they were before. They're still the same dimensions, but I think they only go between Clinton and Jefferson.
But in this case, everybody and people today haggle about whether it's true or not, but everybody knows the story about Mrs. O'Leary and her cow. And that's part of the city's history, and they should preserve that. That should remain.
A little thing, her barn burned down, but her house didn't. And that kind of pissed off people.
Remember one thing, gentlemen. D for dollar, H for history. D comes first before the H. So the D was going to take pride. Just like Don said, the property there is so valuable, and they don't care about history. They care about the dollar bills. And the followers of the city should be ashamed of themselves for being that way. I'm sorry. Those are my feelings.
There are places, whether it's the country or the state, where they're required to respect, whether they want to or not, they're required to respect the historical value of something of that
Well,
sort.
those days are over with John, I'm
That's right.
afraid.
It's getting to be a liability
Chicago.
because they can make more money doing something else with it.
Always
Well,
the
it's
bottom
like-
line. Yeah.
It's like Gettysburg, or I'm sure you Arlington National Cemetery, or there are places where if you wanted to put up buildings, you could make more money, but that's irrelevant. The shrine is so important and the history is so
Right.
important that no one would even dream of allowing you to touch it.
Just recently at not Gettysburg, the funeral, they put up a marker there for the helicopter pilots who died in Vietnam.
Oh, in Arlington?
Yeah, and they said it was very difficult to get the okay to put up a shrine or
Oh,
something
sure.
in Arlington.
The space is so valuable for
right,
burial purposes.
and there's not that many of them in there. Maybe the one for the unknown soldiers and where the President Kennedy is
Yeah.
buried, and
Yeah.
there might be a couple others, but that's about it.
Well, if the fire academy, if that's a historical site, doesn't it remain that they can't tear it down?
Well,
Yeah.
I don't know that the academy itself is probably not a historic site, but
No.
but the site of Mrs. O'Leary's
Right.
the
They should
barn
landmark it
and
somewhere.
there is
Yeah.
there is as John indicated they have the shrine commemorating the spot where it was
Right.
believed the fire began.
Right.
Right.
And you can't just. I would say it would be wrong to go in there and just demolish all of that and put up
Agreed.
some building and then have a little plaque in the lobby saying on this site it is said that.
So
Mrs.
maybe they might have a plaque.
They want
in
to
the
sell the building where the academy and make it bigger.
Well, we don't
but
know.
They would leave the Mrs. O'Leary's.
I don't know what they're
Barn
gonna.
or
I don't know
how?
what they're gonna
Well,
do
the
with the
barn's no
building.
longer there.
Yeah,
Maybe
is
they'll
the house
cons-
there.
No,
No.
it's
Maybe-
the fire academy itself.
Oh yeah, they tore it down.
Maybe they'll convert the academy into a firehouse. I mean, they might. There's always the possibility they might retain it for some other fire purpose. They
Well-
could. I'm sure they could find something to use that building.
There is a former firehouse on the property.
Sure.
What is it? Engine 25 on Taylor and Clinton Street, and they use it the original computer dispatch, and that only lasted about a year, and it didn't work. So now it's a fire education.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They could always reprocess into
Right.
something else. They could
Right.
put offices there. They could always find some purpose. I would think
It's
to be able
a fire safety.
to keep it as a
Building
fire
for
department
kids,
building.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that was called the CAD Center at that time, Don.
Right.
Yeah.
Because
That
they do
was,
have a small museum there too. I mean, part of the academy is they have display cases of the history
The hallway,
of the fire department,
On the first floor.
the Iroquois fire. And,
On the first floor, as you walk into the front door, on the first floor, they have what they call the wall of badges.
right.
And every
right.
fireman who have lost their life
Right.
in the line of duty
Right.
in the Chicago Fire Department, his badge is hanging on that display
Right.
in that display case.
And that bell that you talked about, I mean, they use that bell at ceremonial
Right.
events. That's
That's-
on display there.
That's right. And they have one of the old steamers there, an old hand pump, and a couple pretty good size paintings that depicts
Yes,
the history.
yes. Yeah. So the bottom line is it's well worth the trip. There's a lot to see if you come.
Right.
If you come to the muster, there's a lot to see in the building itself and the displays of some of the great fires that have
Right.
hit Chicago in years past.
Is it admission free? Did we say
Yes.
that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I think the only thing they charge for it are hot dogs. If you want a hot dog, I
Right.
think they do charge.
That's right.
And those hot dogs definitely make ends meet.
And
Da 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 da.
And let me tell you something. Let me tell you something, gentlemen. We're talking about that wall of badges. There's a lot of badges that are hanging on that wall. That firemen who have got killed in the line of duty, and I was at their wake or their funeral. One of the things that the 511 Club does is if a fireman gets injured in the line of duty, let's say he's at a scene of a fire, he falls down the steps or he gets injured for some reason or other, the 511 Club sends him a donation, either from the local food store or a basket of fruit to his home for him to enjoy while he's recovering. If a fireman gets killed in the line of duty, the fire boxes that you see on the street corners, we have a florist out in Lombard that makes a floral piece out of that firebox. And it says up there, so-and-so's last alarm with his badge number.
Right.
The president of the organization presents that floral piece to the family. And when I was president of the 511 Club, I've done it all too many times.
And
At least 15 times or better.
I'm
that
not
I've
sure,
done
but that cabinet where the badges are, didn't Ronnie Howard fund that?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
And by the way, from what I understand, they're making a second backdraft.
Yeah.
But I think it's in Canada.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I didn't hear that, Don. But yes, that's quite. And if you do watch Chicago Fire on Channel 5 during the season, a lot of times they do have shots from the Fire Academy, and they do show that wall of fire on that wall of badges on there.
Excuse me, John, it's now time for our first intermission. You've been listening to Meet the Chicago Historians.
Da-da-da-da-da. And we will be right back, ladies and gentlemen.
We got it in.
Well, we got our way on there.
How long is the intermission? A minute or two?
Until it gets over with.
Short.
Oh, okay. Let me
It's
grab
not terribly long.
Let me grab a pen.
John, has there ever been any thought of memorializing Ken at the Academy with a plaque
Hello,
or
friends.
display?
Do you need new tires for your vehicle? How are the brakes? Are they in good condition? How's your front wheel alignment? Do you need your tires rotated? How are the shocks and struts? Do you need an oil and grease change? How about a tune-up? When was the last time you had your engine tuned up? How about the wiper blades? Are they nice, sharp blades to clean off the rain and snow? How are the headlights, tail lights, stop lights, turn directional signals? Are all the bulbs working? How's your cooling system and the exhaust system? How about your battery? Does that need to be upgraded? How about the belts and hoses, fuel injectors, timing belt and chain, and the air conditioning? Is that all working properly? Well, if you need any maintenance work done on your vehicle, go to Grand Tire and Auto Service, which is located at 7034 West Grand Avenue in Chicago. They are on Grand Avenue on the north side of the street, about 2 blocks east of Harlem Avenue. You can't miss the building. There's a big Goodyear sign right on top of the building. Or you can call area code 773-622-4361. Don, Chris, or Ken will be more than happy to assist you and to help you with any questions you might have about the maintenance on your vehicle. Their hours are Monday through Friday, 7:30 to 7 o'clock in the evening. Saturday, from 7:30 in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And even on Sunday, from 9:30 in the morning until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So once again, for any maintenance work you might need on your vehicle, go to Grand Tire and Auto Supply. Once again, their address is at 7034 West Grand Avenue in Chicago, about 2 blocks east of Harlem Avenue on the north side of the street. And their phone number is area code 773-622-4361. They have great service. Their mechanics are all certified mechanics, and they do quality work. Now, I've been going to Grand Tire with my vehicle since 1985, right up until this present day. So once again, Grand Tire and Auto Service at 7034 West Grand Avenue in Chicago. Their phone number is 773-622-4361. Don, Chris, and Ken will be more than happy to help you and to advise you on any maintenance work you might need on your vehicle. So once again, Grand Tire and Auto Service at 7034 Grand Avenue in Chicago, about 2 blocks east of Harlem Avenue on the north side of the street. You can't miss the building because there's a big Goodyear sign on the top of the building. That's Grand Tire and Auto Service, 7034 Grand Avenue in Chicago, and their phone number is area code 773-622-4361. For quality service, it's Grand Tire Auto Service, 7034 Grand Avenue in Chicago, 773-622-4361. You will be completely satisfied with the work that they do.
Now back to today's edition of Meet the Chicago Historians. John?
Well, thank you very much, Rich. We're back once again for our May edition. We're here on the 21st day of May in the year of our Lord 2018, doing our May edition of Meet the Chicago Historians. This is a great show that began in the days of WJJG, which was operated by a great gentleman named Joe Gentile, that some of us, perhaps all of us here at the table, had the opportunity to meet him. Perhaps I know Don Figarelli did, and certainly John DeVita, who was the station manager there. But that was the origin of our show, Meet the Chicago Historians, the idea being to bring together some fellows who had a knowledge of and interest in the history of the city, but not just the city, the county, the state, the United States, and history in general. And so we're thought of as Chicago historians, and we get together once a month, do this show for 2.5 hours, and talk about what's in the news at the time, as well as usually we have a theme. We try each month to have a topic or a theme that we focus on for part of the program. So later in the show, we're going to be talking about motion pictures, Hollywood, television programs that have dealt with history or American history, and maybe point out some of the inaccuracies, some of the flaws in some of the movies you might know. But what we always do to kick off the show, and we just had a great segment talking about the muster. Once again, that will be on Saturday, June the 16th. They will have the annual muster at the Chicago Fire Academy on DeKoven Street, and it's a great event to see fire department memorabilia and fire vehicles. The fire department brings out quite a great array of their equipment, and engines and pumpers and ladder trucks and emergency vehicles. So that's Saturday, June the 16th, and our moderator, Jack Ryan, phoned in and had a great conversation. So now what we customarily do is talk a little bit about the news of the week, the news of the day, what news has transpired since we were last here for our April show. So I'll just toss that out. Is there any news item that any one of our panelists wants to call attention to, things that have happened in the last few days? Or
the royal wedding is interesting. It brings out how many Americans have a kind of a sense of a longing for a royal family. I wonder about that. Certainly the Irish wouldn't. But I think there's a lot of interest in this country.
Oh, there's a tremendous amount of interest in the British monarchy. One of the reasons is that the British monarchy is one of the very few, and maybe it's certainly the one that, there are many monarchies in the world, many monarchies in Europe: Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Spain, just to mention a few. And then you have the small monarchies, Liechtenstein and Monaco. Japan has an emperor, and there are other monarchies in the Middle East. You have the Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and Qatar. There are many monarchies in the world today. But the British are the one in Europe that have maintained the grand tradition more than any of the others. The ceremony, the pomp and pageantry. It's often said that no one does pomp and pageantry as well as the British do. Even in the movie Yankee Doodle Dandy, when George M. Cohan is visiting London, he says, "Boy, if they had as much history as we do, if we had that kind of history, I would have shaken my hand off waving the flag because of all the centuries of history that the British have."
That's right.
So, and part of it is that you don't see that kind of ceremonial really anywhere else. Whether it's every year when the Queen opens Parliament, usually in November, there's a huge ceremony, the formal state opening of Parliament. The Queen rides through London in the carriage, and she enters the House of Lords wearing the crown, wearing the imperial state crown, and robed. And all the officers are there with their swords of state. So, I mean, it's just unbelievable ceremonial that dates back many, many, many centuries. And I think that's something that many Americans, there's tremendous interest in the royal family in America. And I think a lot of it is just that love. People, they're saying, I love a parade. People love ceremony. And I think sometimes, my personal opinion is we don't have enough in this country. There's nothing wrong with pomp and circumstance to honor your country. We only do it every 4 years when we have the inauguration of a president. The only time really that we have any really big ceremonial occasion in Washington.
Well, aren't they going to initiate a armed forces parade?
They
November or something like November sometime.
Parade, and they're talking about honor about November the 11th, which is appropriate this year because it's the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War. I would imagine
Armed Forces Day, isn't it?
Well, Armed Forces Day was this past Saturday.
What's the one on the 11th?
November the 11th, known as Armistice Day. It's Veterans Day.
Veterans Day.
Today we call it Veterans Day.
Yeah.
But this year it's special because the First World War ended in 1918. That was the first Armistice Day. November the 11th, 1918 was the armistice that ended the First World War. And Donald Trump, what happened was Donald Trump was in Paris last year. He was invited by Emmanuel Macron, the French president, to attend their Bastille Day ceremony, which is their equivalent of our Independence Day. And they have a huge parade in Paris with trucks and vehicles and troops and the Foreign Legion and all the services. And Donald Trump was very impressed. They lay a wreath at their Tomb of the Unknowns, which is at the Arc de Triomphe. We've all seen pictures of the great Arc de Triomphe, which was built by Napoleon, and their unknown from the First World War is buried there, and there's a flame, the eternal flame is there. Donald Trump was apparently quite impressed, and he said, it's unfortunate we don't have this kind of a national ceremony honoring our armed forces, which we don't. There is no national parade. It hasn't been for many years of that type. So that's why this year they want to do something in Washington, and I understand they're going to do it in conjunction with November the 11th with Veterans Day.
That's good.
I just want to backtrack, John,
Sure,
just
sure.
for a moment on the subject earlier with John. Did we lose any firemen at the Our Lady of Angels fire? Were there any firemen that that lost their lives?
There might have been some injuries, but
so.
I don't remember anybody who
The
died.
dead were all children and
And
one, at
nuns.
least one nun, yeah.
But no firemen. I mean,
No.
that
Okay.
was good.
And Don, you remember Bill Giaconetti? They used to do cop talk on WJJG.
Yes.
He was one of the first persons on the scene
Is that?
as a police officer. And right across the street from Our Lady of the Angels school was a young lady who used to come down here to do Meet the Chicago Stories with us. Was Jeanette Frontier.
Really?
She had a candy store right across the street from the school.
Is that right?
Yeah, Jeanette
that-
Frontier.
Is that the candy store that somebody in there wouldn't let them call the fire department?
That I don't know. That I couldn't tell you.
How is Jeanette doing, John? Have you heard?
And I haven't heard. I haven't talked to her in quite a while. I think Jack keeps in touch with her, but I don't.
Yeah, she was part of our panel for
She
some
was
time.
she was very good, very good on the panel.
She always come well prepared. She
Yeah.
always have a booklet with
Yeah.
2 or 3 pages of notes.
Don, do you remember her?
No.
Okay, she used to do her show on Thursday about 11 o'clock.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No, I was just wondering about if we lost any firemen at that Our Lady of Angels fire. That was terrible.
Yeah.
I was down in Fort Bliss, El Paso, Texas when that happened, and I was sitting in the NCO club having steak dinner with my good friend Don Heck, and there was a big news flash that came over about a school being on fire, and I couldn't catch the name of the school. That was Our Lady of the Angels, and my sister Eileen, she went to St. Andrew's School up on Addison and Paulina. So I called my mother and I says, "Is Eileen okay?" She says, "Yeah, why?" I said, "Well, there's a big school fire in Chicago." Well, she says, she's sitting right in front of me, so I know, but it was Our Lady of the Angels, and I was just, because she went to St. Andrews, so I kind of got to start thinking about that,
Why couldn't the kids get out? Why'd they lose so many? What was the problem?
Because of the staircases were on fire.
Right. There was no doors. It was just open staircases.
Yeah.
Last year, I'd say sometime during last year, we did an extended discussion of the Our Lady of the Angels fire here on our broadcast. We did the whole program wasn't devoted to it, but it was a good portion of the program we talked about.
Right. It was on December 1st, 58, I believe.
Bill Kugelman had a great deal of knowledge about the fire.
How many kids do you remember that, John? How many?
93.
I was gonna say it was just under 100. And the number was just under 100 of dead.
Right.
Of dead.
And there was a lady that was burned pretty bad, Michelle McBride, and she lasted until about 7 or 8 years ago.
Oh yeah.
And then she passed away. From what I understand, all of her organs just shut down at the same time, and she passed away.
I think it was 98 kids and 3 nuns, if my knowledge serves me.
Did they change some rules or whatever after that?
Oh God, I think there were all kinds
came
of
out of
That's
that?
the legacy.
Worldwide, and now schools and a lot of places, worldwide now have sprinkler systems in schools now, and all the schools, their sprinkler system, their fire alarms are now hooked into the fire department, either the police or the fire department. They all have. As soon as the water flow alarm goes off or a sprinkler goes off, it hits a switch and that activates an alarm either in the police. Well, of course, in Chicago, it'd be the fire alarm office.
Right.
But like in Norwich, here it happens at the police station, at the fire station.
I believe at the Lady of the Angels, they had a fire alarm, but it was activated by a switch on the wall.
Yeah.
Nobody knew what it was, or else they were panicking and went right by it.
And, you think of Chicago, you think if there's any city where they should have been mindful of fire, it would be Chicago.
Right.
And the city's synonymous with the Chicago. But I'm sure at that point, we hadn't had a school destroyed by fire, and consequently nobody gave it any thought. The way it had been done for the last 50 years was just the way they did it, and nobody was conscious of taking precautions.
That's right.
You had the Iroquois Theater fire, but that didn't impact schools directly.
Well, that was the one with the panic bar.
Nowadays, gentlemen, we don't have schools burning down. We have these idiots that are going and shooting everybody.
Right.
Just last week, they had 8 students that got shot to death
In Texas.
down in Texas.
And I wanted to, I'm just thinking of tying this in, because we're talking about Our Lady of the Angels in schools, but I saw that they had the lieutenant governor of Texas on the Fox interview show yesterday. And he was promoting an idea that has been on my mind ever since these school shootings have taken place. It seems to me that every school should have only one point of entrance. There should be only one entrance that works from the outside. You can have as many doors in the building leading out for emergency purposes, but none of those should open from outside. You should only have one point of entrance, and why can't you have a metal detector or have a guard at every and every kid that comes through there, you at least eyeball them. I say to myself, how could this kid walk in wearing a raincoat apparently, and he's got a shotgun hidden under the raincoat?
Right.
You mean that you couldn't simply maybe pat someone down if he looks suspicious?
Right.
Or step over here, there's a metal detector, we want to check you out. I don't think it would cost a great deal to just monitor every kid that comes through the and, you're probably not going to have to pay a great deal of attention to kindergartners or first graders. I mean, the likelihood of them bringing a gun in is, but as the older kids, you focus. It would seem to me that it wouldn't be difficult to cut down, at least reduce the likelihood of somebody bringing a gun into the school.
Right.
Well, one thing I will say, gentlemen, of course, I'm quite involved with Ridgewood High School, which is just north of us here, just a few blocks. There is one door that everybody comes in, that the students come in. It's right there on Montrose Avenue, 7500 Montrose Avenue. They go through, there's one set of doors, and they go into another set of doors. Right inside the second set of doors, there is a Norwich or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, it's a Norwich police officer. Thursday and Friday, it's a Harwood Heights. You see, Ridgewood serves both Norwich and Harwood Heights. So there is a police officer staying right inside the second set of doors, and he watches every one of them. And there's been a few times when they was a problem. And it's a shame. It's a shame.
Isn't that easy to bring a rifle or a shotgun to conceal a rifle or a shotgun?
Right.
A handgun, well, that's a different case, but maybe metal detectors can deal with that. But so many of these incidents involve either a rifle or, in the case of this one, the last few days, a shotgun. And it doesn't seem to me it would be difficult to spot that coming into a school.
Either that or setting up a perimeter in front of that entrance where they would have to walk 100 feet or 200 feet so they could see somebody coming that looks for.
Yeah. One thing I want to say, I don't know which school it was. There was two of them this past week that were, or last week rather. There was one in Dixon, Illinois, and one down in Texas. Now I don't know which one of the two schools, but when some student found out what was going on, that student went and pulled the fire alarm. And when the fire alarm went off, it evacuated the school. Everybody ran out of the school. Thank God that student did that, because there could have been more lives lost.
Well, wasn't there something a week ago or so where some kid with a rifle was starting to shoot at the school, and some cop inside the school
Dixon
shot at him?
Yeah.
And I don't know if he killed him or...
No, he didn't. He didn't kill him.
But, I mean, they probably...
They wounded him.
It probably ended a big incident that could have happened. Who knows?
And you know why he got what the situation was? He was bullied. Number one, he was bullied by other students, and he was also expelled from the school for having marijuana.
So
to get even, he went in and started shooting. And I think that was the school where the kids pulled the fire alarm and evacuated the school. Everybody got out before this kid could have done any more damage.
You know,
sad.
Whenever we've had these incidents in the past, it's usually involved a semi-automatic rifle. And the gun control crowd have always been beating the drums that we've got to put restrictions on what they call assault rifles. Well, this event that happened in Texas was about as old-fashioned as you could get. He was using a shotgun.
That's right.
This was a shotgun that he was using to blast away. He did have a pistol, but most of the conversation that I've heard had to do with his use of the shotgun. So you haven't heard them talking so much about this, semi-automatic weaponry and how we've got to restrict it. If someone's determined to kill, there are any number of types of weapons, and the weapons are out there. I mean, restricting your or my right to own a firearm as a law-abiding citizen is not going to prevent some idiot from getting his hands on a gun. I understand this. The father owned the guns and gave it to him.
That's what I heard. Yeah.
It wasn't even. You couldn't even have stopped him because they weren't his guns. His name is not on any registration form.
Right.
These were his father's guns, and he gave them to him.
And I think the only difference between what they call an assault rifle and a semi-automatic hunting rifle is the shape. An assault rifle, it looks like something they use, a Case 57 or 47 or something.
My understanding is the military doesn't even use the term assault. That's an invented term.
No.
That's a media term.
Right.
You have rifles that are semi-automatic weapons, or even a full automatic like the M16.
Right.
And what they generally sell to the public is a semi-automatic version.
That looks like
them.
Yeah.
But I don't even think the military uses the term assault rifle.
I don't think
it's
so
just
either.
a term that the media has invented. It sounds dangerous.
Well, and they got people that don't know what they're talking about saying, well, this person used an assault weapon like they use in a war.
Yeah, and they make it sound, Because fully automatic weapons have been illegal since the 1930s, I believe. Machine guns, true machine guns, which are automatic weapons where you pull the trigger once and any number of bullets come. That's an automatic weapon. You're not allowed to have those. Those are illegal.
Right. I understand that the Thompson was supposedly built for World War I, and it kind of missed it. So they were showing ads for whoever was selling them to farmers to shoot predators. Hey, that works.
Yeah, they sometimes called them trench brooms.
Right.
The trench
or Chicago
broom.
typewriter.
Well, in the 20s they became, it was a Chicago piano,
Right.
Chicago typewriter, chopper. You hear they had all these nicknames for them, but they gained notoriety with the gangland wars of the 1920s. You always hear the fellow his military record was that he was a tail gunner on a beer truck.
Or in a garbage truck.
Yeah.
It's often brought up to maybe help end this gun shooting in the schools is to arm teachers. I see problems with that. Because most teachers are hardly qualified and trained to shoot guns, even if you do that. And there could be a situation where the teacher who is armed might shoot somebody trying to put down the. There are problems. I don't think most experts agree that you should arm teachers, but I think John, your point is very well taken. A combination of metal detectors, even a single armed person on duty at the school, near the entrance, a single entrance.
Right.
That's the best way to go.
Why do these shooters go to? If you want to kill people in a public building, they go to schools. They don't go to police stations. You've never heard of a shooter going to
everybody's armed there.
Right.
Yeah.
You've
Right.
never heard of a shooter going to a police
a
station
good point.
in order to kill a lot of people because they know there are going to be a dozen guns aimed at them.
That's right.
They go to a school because they know it's like open season. They know the likelihood of there being anyone there firing back is almost zero. It's like a free fire zone.
I know where I live, they've got these stickers all over the place. Guns are not allowed here. Well, that's what these guys are looking for. They'll come and
Yeah.
want it out because nobody
There's no
has a
one there
gun.
with a gun. That's
They
the
know
whole
this,
point.
Yeah. A lot
That's
of public places, yes.
I don't think anyone has suggested compelling teachers,
No.
to be armed.
You're right.
I think the idea is if you have a teacher who, say, is an ex-Marine or an ex-soldier, an
and with a little
ex-Air
extra
Force,
training, perhaps.
and or just someone who's interested in guns, who has his own permit,
Right.
and he wishes to be, and he has a legal permit to carry a concealed weapon, why not permit him to carry that weapon in school
That's a
if
good
he
point.
wishes to volunteer to do it? I don't think anyone wants anybody compelled to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
But
and-
the more good guys you have who are armed, the less likelihood that the bad guys are going to be able to kill innocent people.
And if they could take care of at the airports, you think they should be able to take care of it in a school.
That's it. That's another. They point out. We've hardened our airports, our banks. I've often said I go to an office building downtown from time to time. Not a government building. It's just a private office building. And when you come in, you've got to show identification. You can't go to the elevator without first checking in at the reception area,
Right.
who you're there to see. You have to show your identification. Now, if we can do that at an office building, why not at a school? Why can't you tighten the security at our schools?
I did that once. I said, I got to use the bathroom. He says, "Is it an emergency?" He said, "Okay." And somebody followed me to the bathroom.
Sure.
And wait until I come out and followed me out.
Sure.
That's fair.
You know what I think? What they could do at the school, okay? Human resources, let's say. A lot of these kids that they're ex-students, been expelled for one reason or another. A lot of them, so they want to get even, whatever. I think the human resources department at a school should have a list of expelled students that were expelled,
Right.
students that were given a discharge perhaps for a mental
Yeah.
whatever,
A
okay?
mental issue,
Okay, and kind of keep track. Say there's like 40 or whatever,
Right.
but keep track of those people. Have someone every so often. Well, how is John doing? A phone call or something to this one who was expelled or had some problems, just to kind of let them aware, the parents aware, the kid, that they're not being watched per se, but to prevent them from building up. I'm going back to that school,
Yeah.
and I'm going to get even.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think they
Make
that-
something of
that
the old
should be a-
truant officers
Yeah,
of years
that
ago.
should
Yeah.
be
Something
almost a law.
Well,
Something on
I think that
the
was
idea
cut
of
down.
a no-fly list.
Yeah, right.
The problem
have
today,
pictures.
though, is there are all these restrictions. They say you're violating their rights.
Or it's
you're
racist.
infringing upon their privacy if you do that. It's not as easy to supervise problem. the event that took place, not the one in Texas, but the most recent one in Florida. Remember that fellow was on the internet saying he wanted to, I'm gonna be killing people,
and they didn't,
and no one did anything about it, and it was reported. I think there were reports to the police, if I'm not mistaken, and their argument was they didn't have the right because the question of his mental health. Do we have the right to intervene? The right. Things today are not the way they were in the 1940s when you could monitor problems like this. We've created more problems for ourselves with all these restrictions that we put on people.
You're listening to Meet the Chicago Historians, and we thank you for it. We'll be right back.
Hello, friends. Are you looking for a place to have some printing done? Well, I have the right place for you to go, and that is the printing store in Oak Park, Illinois. Call or see Phil Berry at 621 Madison Street, or call 708-383-3638. Phil Berry will sit down with you and help you plan whatever you need printed. Now, his products are brochures, booklets, business cards, catalogs, envelopes, letterheads, flyers, invitations, newsletters, notepads, menus, mailers, manuals, labels, posters, postcards, price list, NCR forms, sale sheets, table tents, pocket folders, and presentation forms. And he also has 1 to 4 color offset printing, digital copying, high-speed copying, graphic designs, typesetting, laminating, foil stamping, die cutting, and imprinting. And his complete bindery service includes booklets, cutting, scoring, folding, numbering, padding, and drilling. So once again, for all your printing needs, call or see Phil Berry at the printing store at 621 Madison Street in Oak Park, Illinois, or call 708-383-3638. They are located at Madison Street and Clarence, just east of Oak Park Avenue. And that's at 621 Madison Street in Oak Park, Illinois. Or give Phil Berry a call at 708-383-3638. For all your printing needs, the printing store is there to help you. They're 621 Madison Street in Oak Park, Illinois. And once again, you can call Phil Berry at 708-383-3638.
That's where the park was.
Now back to our show. John?
Thank you very much, Rich. And why don't we go around the table and have everyone just briefly introduce themselves very quickly. We like to do that a couple of times during our program, so I'll turn to the gentleman on my left.
Don Figurelli, the Don of Sports. Happy to be here.
Your announcer, Rich Lang.
Who am I? Oh, Don Peter.
Don Peter, and John Escachoco, your moderator for today's show here at the John DeVita Broadcast Center. Well, we talked about the muster at the Chicago Fire Academy, and we talked a little bit about the news of the day, including the British royal wedding and also the shooting tragedies that have taken place. Our theme for this month's edition of Meet the Chicago Historians are historical movies and television programs, how motion pictures and the film industry have presented and sometimes distorted American history or world history. And Jack Ryan, our moderator, and I had talked about this. It's a shame Jack couldn't be here today because it's a topic that is of great interest to him. I'll just toss out one example. one of the most glaring examples of a great movie that is inaccurate in terms of its history. And I want to say at the beginning, motion pictures are entertainment, and if you take them as entertainment, fine.
Right.
Movies about history can be very entertaining, but don't get your history from them. Don't think that because you saw a movie about the Civil War that you now know everything there is. You know everything there is to know about the Civil War, because what you saw in the movie might be completely at variance with what actually happened. And the best example of that is a great Errol Flynn movie called They Died with Their Boots On, which is the story of General George Armstrong Custer. And it co-stars Olivia de Havilland, whom I always introduce as my close personal friend, because I had the great privilege many years ago of meeting Olivia de Havilland.
Did you, John? Excellent.
I met Olivia de Havilland, spoke with her, had my picture. I have a picture at home with her, and I have an autographed copy of Gone with the Wind, signed by Olivia de Havilland.
And she's still living, pushing the age of 102.
100. She will turn 102 in July, I
Yes,
believe.
Yes. Incredible.
And it is amazing. When I saw one of the Errol Flynn movies, because she made a number of movies with Errol Flynn, and I saw the movie. I think it's the one called Santa Fe Trail, and I think to myself, this movie was made before World War II. She's a star in it, and I met her, and she's still alive. It's incredible to look at that, because all the other people in the film are long gone. Errol Flynn died, I think, in 1958.
Right.
So, these people are all gone. But They Died with Their Boots On is the story of General George Armstrong Custer, and it mainly deals with the 7th Cavalry and with the Little Bighorn. And there are many controversies about what happened there. But the interesting is the beginning of the film when they deal with the Civil War. And it is just filled with including the fact that Sidney Greenstreet, great actor, plays General Winfield Scott, who was a great American hero, was the hero of the war with Mexico. He was a general in 3 wars. He was a young general in the War of 1812. He was a senior general in the war with Mexico. And he was still the commanding general of the Army in 1861 when the Civil War begins. And they got his insignia right. They've got 3 stars on his shoulder because he was what they called a brevet lieutenant general. He was the only officer between George Washington and Ulysses S. Grant to wear 3 stars in the United States Army. He was given like the honorary rank of lieutenant general. All the other generals we had in that period, the most they would have, they'd be a major general, 2 stars. But what's wrong with the film is they deal with the Battle of Gettysburg, which Custer was involved. He was a cavalry officer, and Custer had a terrific record in the Civil War. If all you know about Custer is that he died at the Little Bighorn, he was a great hero of the Union Army in the Civil War, great cavalry leader. They have him in battle at the Battle of Gettysburg, and there's Winfield Scott, Sidney Greenstreet, in Washington at the War Office getting the telegraph reports, and he's in overall command of the war and in command at Gettysburg. And the problem with this is that Winfield Scott retired in 1861. Scott was out of the Army 2 years before the Battle of Gettysburg. But they had Sidney Greenstreet in the movie, and I guess they wanted to take advantage of him. So there's Sidney Greenstreet, there's Winfield Scott giving the orders at Gettysburg in a battle that took place 2 years after, in reality, he retired.
That's good.
As a footnote, it's a shame that he wasn't still there. We probably would have handled the war a lot better if Scott had been in command. He was a brilliant general. But they used the argument against him that he was too old. He was along in years by that point. Not by our standards, but by their standards, he was.
And very heavy. He could barely move. But that still doesn't take away from his military knowledge.
No, there was nothing wrong with his brain. And they always said, well, he couldn't sit a horse. In those days, they thought a general had to appear on horseback in command of his troops.
Lead his troops. Right.
He actually laid down the theory of how to win the war, which ultimately was how we won the Civil War. But they wanted a young fire eater named George McClellan to take over, and McClellan turned out to be a disaster. But in any event, that's just an example of the inaccuracies of the movie. You see him there in command. There's another movie, I think it's Santa Fe Trail, where they have Custer and Hood and Sheridan and Jeb Stuart all in the same graduating class at West Point. Ronald Reagan plays Custer, And Errol Flynn plays Jeb Stewart, and they're best buddies in the film. And the irony, of course, is that these guys all attended West Point at different years. They weren't even contemporaries. Most of them weren't even at West Point together for any 1 year, let alone being part of the same graduating class. But for the movie, they put all these future Civil War generals in the same West Point class. So you have to take a lot of this with a grain of salt. That's my curbstone opinion. I'd throw it out for anybody else. Any of your favorite movies, any of your favorite historical movies you'd like to talk about?
Well, I'll bring up one because it touches upon a topic we talked about earlier, the Chicago fire, the ceremony we will be holding at the Fire Academy, the movie In Old Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
That's right.
Sure.
Starring Tyrone Power,
Don
Don
Amici.
Amici, right.
Alice Faye, I think, was in it. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right.
A well-done movie for its day, pre-computer effects.
Right.
But I never remembered in my Chicago history that Don Amici, an O'Leary brother, was mayor of Chicago.
Mayor of Chicago at the time of the fire.
Right. And they showed at the end a long shot of Chicago burning, and they were looking from a road, and the road was going downhill. I said, I don't know of any roads going downhill around there in Chicago.
Sure.
That wasn't supposed to be an aerial view, was it?
I don't know.
Hey, you know airplanes then.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, they did a lot of historical films in the 30s, and they and I understand their job mainly is to entertain. You know,
Sure.
they don't prevent a good story. But the problem is when you entertain with real events and real historical figures, and then you're making the story up, that the viewers come there
They think
and
it's
they,
history.
and they don't understand, and they think that's
No, you-
well, yeah, I saw it in the movie. That's how it happened, and it can be very.
Well, one of the most popular military movies in the early 1970s, I think it was Richard Nixon's favorite movie, was Patton. I've never heard much brought out. I'm sure there were some historical inaccuracies in that one. I wonder. Maybe things were glossed over, things were simplified.
One thing,
Inaccuracies, I don't know.
I
Did you ever
haven't
hear-
heard of any. I mean,
Right.
there are a lot of historical incidents in that film, but most of them are pretty well documented.
right.
I think you're
Things that
probably
he
right, yeah.
things that Patton says in the movie are things we know Patton actually said. He hated the Russians,
Yeah.
wanted to throw the Russians back to Moscow where they belong. I mean, that's true.
His longing for the days of ancient Greece and Rome.
Yes,
harking back to
he
those.
did have a certain interest in reincarnation. You know, he
That's
thought
right.
that he had served. He did make the crack about. He was opening he was in England because he commanded this fictitious army. I think it was called the 15th Army that was supposedly going to invade Europe at the Pas de Calais in France, which we wanted the Germans to think we were going to invade there
Well.
and not at the beaches of Normandy, where we
Right.
in fact did. But he was asked to give a speech, and there were a lot of ladies there. Were dedicating
Right.
an American-British service club or something. And he just makes this off-the-cuff remark and says, well, since it is the destiny of the American and British people to rule the world after this war is over, and everybody's upset because he didn't mention the Russians.
Right.
He didn't. Not they weren't upset about the idea of the Americans and British ruling the world, but that he didn't mention the Russians.
Well,
And of course he said, well, if there had been any Russians there, I would have mentioned them. I
Right.
don't like the so-and-sos, but I would have mentioned them.
he was put in that fake army after he slapped that kid around, and Eisenhower had
Yeah,
a
yeah.
No, that was an episode,
And-
yes.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
well,
And that's true. That
that
actually happened.
and
Yeah.
he had that rubber army where they made all those balloons.
Yeah, all the dummy tanks. and-
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But
Yeah.
from what I understand, he had the voice of Squeaky Fromm or something like
He
that.
did not sound like George C. Scott.
No, he-
Scott looked like Patton, but he didn't sound
whiny,
like
high.
No, he had it. Yeah,
whiny
I've
voice.
heard recordings of Patton's voice, and he does. Hey man, you know.
I can't recollect quite. Why did George C. Scott refuse the award as Best Actor for that movie?
I think he didn't believe. He had this idea that acting should not be based on rewards. That you shouldn't give medals and awards to. He was just doing his job, and you shouldn't. It was something along those lines. It had nothing to do with the film or politics.
Right, that
it
was
was
the
nothing
point.
like
Right,
that. It was
right,
nothing
right,
about politics or. It was just that he didn't feel actors should be competing against one another to receive an award.
Did he ever? I'm sure he made other movies, but I
Oh, yeah.
can't remember.
I don't remember if he was ever nominated for an Oscar.
Oh.
One of his
at
early
any
ones
time.
was The Hustler with Paul Newman
Oh,
and
yeah.
Jackie Gleason.
Yeah.
Anatomy of a Murder. So he had a strong acting career, George C. Scott.
He came back and he played Patton again for a TV movie when they did called The
did he?
Last Days of Patton, where they talked about how Patton was in the accident and how he died.
Right.
That was, but I don't think that was a theatrical movie. I think that was made for television. But he did come back and do the role of Patton one more time.
Yeah.
How
So
did he die? How did
Patton was in his staff car, and a truck crashed into the back of the staff car at an intersection. As I recall,
a military truck?
Military truck.
Yeah.
His car, they had to stop because there was something blocking the road, and they had just passed the intersection. The truck didn't realize that and came through. It was like, the light, I don't know if there was a stoplight, but they had gone through the intersection, and they come to a stop because of this obstruction, and this truck plows right into Patton's car. There were three other, I believe there were the driver and two other passengers, and they all left the car with nothing or with scratches, and Patton had his neck broken.
Oh, really?
He lived a while after that, and he
For
died
days.
in the
They
hospital.
deal with this. Yeah, he was in horrible pain. I mean, they had him in, it was just an awful way for a man who had gone through two
Right.
wars. He was
Right.
in the First World War. He was actually in Europe in the First World War, unlike
Right.
Eisenhower.
Well,
he
he
got
was-
to Europe in World War One.
Him
Some
and Eisenhower were
conspiracy
both in the
theory-
tank corps, weren't they?
I'm sorry.
Him and Eisenhower and Bradley were all in like at the tank corps. or
Well,
something?
Patton was a cavalryman, and was always an exponent of cavalry. Even in the 1920s and 1930s,
Okay.
he's writing about the role of cavalry in a future war. But he also had an interest in armor. He was with armor in the First World War, and cavalry and armor were considered
Right.
together at that time,
And
and that was what moved him. I'm not sure if Bradley was ever in armor. And
they all knew each other, maybe
Oh, yeah.
from West
Oh.
Point or
Oh,
something
sure.
like that.
Could be.
Yeah.
And that's how they got their positions. I
Ike
think.
and Patton were buddies. I mean,
Right.
they were assigned together
Bradley
during.
and there was another one. I can't remember his name. But they were all either went to West Point together or they all knew
Well,
each
just
other.
about all those
During the
officers
war.
were West Pointers. I mean,
Right.
I've heard some conspiracy theorists argue that perhaps Patton was killed on purpose because he was advocating war with Russia, essentially.
He was ahead of his time.
Yeah.
He was talking against the Soviets in 1945. When we still were in the euphoria of the war. No one wanted to think. Most people didn't want
Most
to
didn't.
think that we faced just as big a threat from the Soviets as we
Right.
did from the. But Patton foresaw, as Churchill did. He foresaw, and he talked about it when it was not yet politic to talk about it. If Patton had lived another few years, who knows? I mean, he was ahead of his time the way Churchill in the 30s was warning everybody about the Nazis. Today we honor Churchill for having been
Right.
ahead of. Patton could have wound up, president of the United States instead of. He might have been the man that say, "Hey, he was
Yeah.
right. He warned
Yeah.
us about all of this."
In 52, he might have been president.
It's
Yeah, exactly right.
it's at
Yeah,
least
yeah.
conceivable. You
sure.
say to yourself, Patton may not have had the temperament to make a good politician, but who knows?
All these what ifs of history.
Who knows?
Fascinating.
Who knows?
Who put MacArthur in the South Pacific?
FDR.
Roosevelt?
Well, he was MacArthur. MacArthur was in the Philippines when the war began. He was technically
he got chased out of the Philippines.
Well, he had technically been retired. He was retired so that he could go to the Philippines to organize their armed forces in the 30s, to put together a Philippine military.
Right.
But he went there nominally as a civilian. He had nominally retired from the U.S. Army.
Right.
And they gave him the rank of Field Marshal. I don't know if you know this. Douglas MacArthur was the only American officer ever to have the rank of Field Marshal.
Interesting.
He
Well,
was
where
the
did that go into
Field
the
Marshal
stars?
of the Philippine Army.
Oh, okay.
He was their Field Marshal. And he was in the process of when the war erupts in the Pacific. He was recalled to active duty before Pearl Harbor. He was reinstated
Right.
as a U.S. Army officer before Pearl Harbor.
Was-
But that's why he was out there in the Pacific when the war
Right.
began.
Now, was the Philippines attacked the same day as Pearl Harbor or the next day?
I don't know if there was any minor, but the main attack came the next day.
Because
He was hit
somebody
the next
called
day.
him and he says, "We're fine. We can handle anything they throw at us," and that was
Yeah,
the biggest flub of
He
the
was
war.
given the
maybe.
name of Dugout Doug. for a
Dugout
while.
Doug.
No, that
his
dogged him for a while.
his probably the least successful, the part of his career is the fact that they caught him unprepared
Right.
in the Philippines
Right.
24 hours after the attack at Pearl Harbor.
Right.
They hit Clark Field, which my dad was in the Philippines during the war, and he saw Clark Field, which was the big U.S. Air Force base in the Pacific, and may still be there. It was our base until we left the Philippines in the 1990s when we finally pulled
Right.
all of our stuff out. But they hit Clark Field. We had B-17s based at Clark Field. They caught. So there's never been an adequate explanation why he was caught unprepared, and that's the one real dark mark against MacArthur is that,
Right.
that he was not ready a day later after they had already bombed Pearl
Well,
Harbor.
he was the whatever they called the guy who led the occupation of Japan,
Oh yeah,
and
he was
U.S. probably. They probably took care of the population because basically they couldn't take care of themselves that much in Japan, and
we did. I mean, the Japanese were.
they liked us.
They had been told, they had been told by their leadership that the Americans were barbarians.
Right.
That when if we ever came to Japan, we were going to loot and kill and pillage and
Right.
rape and if the Russians had gotten there, I'm sure they would have. But it wasn't the Russians; it was the Americans.
Right.
And they soon found out that the Americans were absolutely nothing like they had been
Right.
told. And we rebuilt Japan the same way we rebuilt Europe after World War II.
Right.
He was the supreme commander. He had the same.
Yeah.
He had this just as Ike was supreme Allied commander in
Right.
Europe. He was supreme Allied
It
commander.
wasn't MacArthur's final decision to keep the emperor as at least
Yes.
nominal head of Japan.
Yeah.
Right.
Which
That
might
was
have
the
been the
only
best
exception to
decision
the
he made,
total surrender.
Unconditional
That they
surrender.
would keep the.
As long as they were, it wasn't done official. It was done kind of with a wink. The Japanese were led to believe because they were afraid that we might take the emperor and behead him or hang
Right.
him, and they would have fought them. They would have fought to the death to protect the emperor. They believed that he was virtually a god. And once they were kind of given the unofficial, no, we're not going to hang the emperor,
Right.
then they were willing to surrender.
Right.
And see, the danger is that the hotheads were using that to tell, no, you can't. You got to fight to the last ditch because the
Right.
Americans will take the emperor out and they'll execute him. Once they found out we weren't going to do that, then they were finally willing to surrender.
Right.
So, any other motion pictures that anybody? Anybody got a favorite historical motion picture that you'd like to talk
I
about?
remember as a kid watching. They had one. I don't know. It was in the 50s or 60s. Audie Murphy to Hell and Back.
That's his life story, I think.
Right.
Isn't it? I've never seen that film.
I've seen
that
it,
film.
and he's buried in Arlington.
Is he?
As you're going down the road, he's right on the road.
Well, he was a Medal of Honor winner.
Multiple, I believe.
I think didn't he win every medal that was available? I think Audie Murphy won every
Right.
combat decoration that you could win as a
Right.
U.S. soldier.
And then he died in a ditch somewhere on an Indian reservation.
Is that true?
From what I understand, he was drunk and he
No.
fell in a ditch and drowned or something like that.
No, I think you're thinking of one of the guys at Iwo Jima. I think that was true. There was a
Maybe.
one of the men of the flag raising at
that
Iwo
sounds
Jima.
more like it, John.
Yeah,
one
I think you're
one
right.
of the men at Iwo
Yeah.
Jima was an American Indian.
Okay. Then maybe-
Ira
Hayes.
That
Yeah,
sounds
Is that
right.
yeah,
Ira
that's
Hayes?
you're right.
That sounds
I
right.
think he died under circumstances
Yeah.
of what you're describing.
Right.
I don't think.
Whereas
that was-
Audie Murphy had a relatively good movie career.
Yeah, I mean a lot of westerns.
A lot
in
of
the
B-level
50s.
westerns.
Yeah, I remember him in
yeah.
a Western, but
Yeah.
Was he in Europe or in Asia? Where
Europe. He was with
Europe.
the Third Army.
Europe?
Europe. I think could have been Third Army with Patton. Yeah, could have been.
Well, he was an infantry. Well, he was infantry.
Infantry, right.
Oh
He
yeah,
had to be, right?
yeah.
Right.
I'm thinking you were talking about World War II. One inaccuracy that I always look for in movies, and I've seen it, is you'll see a movie set in World War II, and behind the general there'll be an American flag naturally in his desk, or you'll see an American flag flying somewhere,
It's a 50-star
and it's
flag.
a 50-star flag. I have
That's
seen
a bad.
I have seen that several times
Right.
in
Yeah,
motion
that's bad.
pictures.
That is
you know.
bad.
It's- they didn't stop to make that correction.
How about Guadalcanal Diary? Wasn't that one of the first kind of war movies that came out?
I don't think I saw it. so-
Guadalcanal Diary, remember
I'm
that
familiar with that.
Is that the one with Lloyd Nolan? Is Lloyd Nolan in that?
one? could be, yeah.
William Bendix.
Well, John Wayne, well, I'm not sure. John
No,
Wayne?
It sounds like John Wayne. It doesn't sound like one of his
Guadalcanal
movies. I don't
Diary?
think so.
I don't know. I may be. Wake Island is William Bendix. William Bendix is in Wake Island, and Brian Donlevy. They do the fall of Wake Island,
Right.
and that. But I don't know of any. Again, I don't know of any inaccuracies in that picture.
Didn't Glenn Miller make, like, you call it Glenn Miller, when he was in the Army?
Well, there's the Glenn Miller story.
Yeah.
With Jimmy Stewart. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shows how he takes off and he dies. You know, he dies under mysterious circumstances. The plane crashes. I don't know of any inaccuracies in that.
I don't
film.
remember, but what surprised me is his entire heyday as being a band leader was, what, more than around 5 years?
5 years, yeah, from like 39 to 40. He died in 44, so
Right.
he had like 5 years. Yeah.
Yeah,
We think, he's such a legendary figure, but he was really only at the top for like 5 years.
right.
Yeah. One thing about that film, Harry Morgan, who would later be Colonel Potter
Right.
on MASH, plays his buddy in the band and sidekick, and I think he's in some ways based on Tex Beneke. But
Yeah.
you won't hear Tex Beneke's name mentioned in that film, who was an integral part of the Glenn
Right.
Miller, because there had been a falling out, as I understand, there was a falling out between Tex Beneke and Mrs. Miller by the time the movie was made. Mrs. Glenn Miller, and for some reason, Tex Beneke did not involve himself in the making of the film, and they couldn't
Right.
use his name.
Right.
So they create this fictitious character that Harry Morgan
Right.
portrays, who's kind of Glenn Miller's sidekick. He's Tex Beneke without being called Tex Beneke.
But in reality, Tex Beneke took over the band after
band.
Miller died.
Yeah. But
And
a
he
friend,
did it until
a friend of mine was telling me there was some.
60s, maybe the 70s.
Oh yeah.
Really?
Beneke was still around, I think, in the 70s. Yeah.
Because
yeah.
The First National Bank, they got that little plaza next door to it.
Oh sure.
And they used to have music there on Monday nights, and they had the Glenn Miller band there with Tex Beneke, and the place was packed.
Really?
I can see this. One thing I always marvel at World War II era movies, especially the war movies, led often by John Wayne, they
Right.
could be gritty, realistic, but you won't hear one swear word in them.
No.
Well, that was
Yet
the
they still
code.
capture the spirit, often the dirt of war.
That was the code. You couldn't.
sure.
You couldn't use it.
Oh.
But what they kind of alluded. They had euphemisms. How many times in a movie have you heard someone say Judas Priest?
That's a good one.
You ever heard? You ever heard that? You'll hear that
Who
in
was
movies.
that?
Judas Priest. Well, you know what they're really.
Yeah.
They're what they really knowing it. Judas
Jesus
and
Christ.
priest. Though Judas was not a priest, but it sounds like the name
Yeah.
of Jesus Christ. So it was a way of saying that without
Yeah.
violating the code. By
Well, there's all
saying
kinds of euphemisms out there for swearing. Like, "Go darn it!"
Yeah,
"Gee whiz!"
Yeah.
"Gee willikers!" All that stuff,
yeah.
If said firmly, they could take the place of swear
How
words.
many
And they must
movies
have.
did Bob Hope and who was his buddy?
Bing Crosby.
Bing Crosby. They must have made 5 or 6 road movies?
The road movies,
Maybe 6 or 7.
Yeah, I think at least
Yeah.
6.
Yeah.
And they were great buddies too. I mean,
Oh.
they bought oil wells and everything between them.
Oh yeah.
That's
But
that
but the origin of those films was Hope and Crosby were golfing buddies,
Right.
and they would take some of these other Hollywood bigwigs to make up the foursome, and they would be cutting up on the links, making wisecracks,
Right.
making back just ad lib, And one of the directors said, "God,
Yeah,
this
make
is
a
a
movie
gold
about
mine. These guys, they don't need a writer; they can do it." So that was the origin of it.
Okay.
And even though those movies had they put these two guys, because they never appeared together in the movies. Someone says, "Put these two guys together and just let them go."
They still
They would have a script, but the script usually was, they would make up dialogue, and
right.
what they were making up was better than what was in the
Yeah.
script.
Yeah.
and they still show them on TV.
Oh, they're great movies. The Road to Morocco, I think, is one of
Right.
the funniest movies ever
Often
made.
co-starring
And-
Dorothy Lamour. I mean,
She was in all of them, wasn't she?
I think she was, yeah.
Might have
Even,
been.
she even had and the last one they made was in 1962 called The Road to Hong Kong, And Joan Collins was the girl, because by that point Dorothy Lamour was along in years, you know, and
Right.
actresses they had to. But she's still a cameo. They still had to have Dorothy Lamour in the picture, you
Right.
know.
That's something.
In the movie, in the song, you know, when they're singing where we're going, why we're going, how can we be sure?
Right.
But I'll lay you 8 to 5 that we'll meet Dorothy Lamour.
You're right.
One of the things I loved about that was the way they would make fun of the fact that they're making a movie. I mean, they're kidding about the fact that they're in the movie.
And they screw up their lines, and they would say they had.
There's another line in that song. You know, they're on this camel, and Hope is singing that, and one of the lines is, "In spite of danger we may face, we haven't any fears. Paramount will protect us 'cause we signed for 5 more years." Ooh,
Speaking
here we
of,
go.
We'll be right back after these messages of interest and importance.
You guys realize that
Now that the warm weather has finally arrived, it's time to plant your flower garden and your vegetable garden. It's not too late to start planting your flowers and vegetable garden. And I have just the right place for you to go and get your flowers and vegetable plants. You can go to Pesky's Flower Gift Shop and Garden Center and Greenhouse at 170 South River Road in Des Plaines, Illinois. Pesky's has a very large selection of flowers, vegetable plants, and much, much more. Whatever you need for your flowers or your vegetable garden, you can find it at Pesky's. Now, they are located at 170 South River Road. They are just north of Route 14 or Minor Street and south of Gulf Road, which is Route 58 on the west side of River Road. And be sure to stop in and visit their flower and gift shop. Again, Pesky's Flower Gift Shop and Garden Center at 170 South River Road in Des Plaines, Illinois. River Road is Route 45, and they are just north of Route 14 or Minor Street and south of Gulf Road, which is Route 58. You can call Pesky's at 847-299-1300 for more information. So once again, Pesky's Flower, Gift, and Garden Center at 170 River Road in Des Plaines, Illinois, and their phone number once again is 847-299-1300 for more information.
Sign off for me, will you, John? I mean,
Now's the time.
whatever.
yeah, you know.
We might even remember you.
And now back to our discussion. John?
Thank you very much, and we have to say goodbye
Yes.
to Don Figarelli, the Don of Sports. We've been glad to have you here today, Don, and look forward to you being here in the
I
future.
appreciate you. So how about doing you probably have done a show about sports movies. Have you done anything
not about
along
movies
those
and-
lines?
Maybe we can do that as well. Maybe
Will
we'll
you
do that at a
invite me for
future
that
edition.
one?
Sure.
We'll do that after you leave.
Yeah.
The pride of the
Thanks,
Yankees.
Right.
Bye,
Take
Don.
care.
You take care.
Take care of yourself.
Great. Thanks for coming, Don.
Yeah.
Good
Hi,
suggestion.
Johnny. We'll see you in a couple weeks or whatever, huh? Okay.
That's Don Figarelli, the Don of Sports, and we've been glad to have him here for the first several segments of our May edition of Meet the Chicago Historian. So we're here today on the 21st day of May, 2018, and we're talking about historical movies and some of the great films and sometimes how they can be inaccurate. And I often say, go to the movie and enjoy the entertainment, but don't get your history from the movies because it can be very dangerous.
Not a good primary
That's right.
source.
No.
Right.
And now these days, to get history right, you have to go back to the source.
That's right. That's right. In fact, when you study history, one of the things you learn in studying history, which I've done, is that they talk about primary sources. You know, when you're writing a book about a historical figure, they
Right.
want you to go back to his diaries,
The origin,
to
yeah.
his private papers, to the papers of people that were his contemporaries,
Right.
people he served with, state government documents. Those are called the primary sources. You know,
Right.
what somebody wrote about him 50 years later, even if it's a well-known book, the thinking is that doesn't add anything. You go back and
Right.
find out what he actually said, what he actually wrote, his speeches, if there are
Right.
records of his speeches, and that's where it's felt. That's where you get the best history, is going back to the origins and getting your source from there.
What amazes me, you could have two people watching the same incident and get two completely different accounts of it.
Eyewitnesses to an accident.
Right.
Everything like
Sure.
that, sure. Yeah.
There's a great episode of I think it was Kojak, where an incident had taken place and there were 3 or 4 witnesses, and who was it? Crocker was Kojak's. He had a sidekick named Crocker, I think, and Kojak's there with his lollipop. He says, "Well, get the witnesses and give me a summation of it." So the guy, he goes off and talks to the witnesses, and meantime Kojak has some interaction with somebody else. And then Crocker comes back and he's got this pad in his hand. He said, "Well, here's what we got, Lieutenant. Our suspect is a tall, short guy. He's somewhere between 140 and 280 pounds. One eye blue, one eye gray."
Balding on one side of the head.
So, you know, and it's true. I mean, people, what you see and what somebody else sees, you can look at the same event and
Right.
come away with a completely different story as to
Or even people see it now, in amount of time later, you remember something completely different too.
Sure,
Well, that's true.
sure.
Yeah, yeah.
And whatever you see is going to be affected by your personality.
Right.
What was important to you, the thing
Right.
that you focused on, may be different from what the other guy
Right.
focused on,
Right.
and how you interpret what you saw, how you interpret what you saw. What did it mean? You see
Right.
this all happening in a flash. What did it all mean?
Right.
We talk about historical inaccuracies. I love westerns. I've come to have a revived interest in westerns, and I've always had a great admiration for Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson. Those were my heroes when I
Right.
was a kid. Hugh O'Brien and Gene Barry, Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson.
Right.
And the most famous western episode of all was the gunfight at the OK Corral. And that story has been retold many, many times in motion pictures, and almost always riddled with inaccuracies. I mean, the movies are as riddled with inaccuracies as the Clantons wound up riddled with bullets in the gunfight at the OK Corral. You familiar with the movie My Darling Clementine, which is Henry Fonda as Wyatt Earp, and
Victor Mature.
Victor Mature is Doc Holliday, great partners,
Right.
and Walter Brennan is Old Man Clanton. And I mean, the rudiments of the story is that the Clantons fought the Earps in Tombstone at the OK Corral,
Right.
and that's true. And if you see the movie, that much is true. Virtually everything else in the movie is
Right.
wrong. I mean, virtually everything else in that picture is wrong. I'll just give you an example. It starts off with Earp and his 3 brothers, Virgil, Morgan, and James, are taking cattle across the Midwest, and they're headed for California, I think. Well, that's wrong, because Virgil and Morgan were already in Arizona, and Earp was coming to join them. And Jim is the youngest brother, and Jim gets killed because when Wyatt and Virgil and Morgan go into Tombstone to get a shave and a haircut and something to eat, they leave little James. Young James is left out there to take care of the cattle, and the Clantons come and murder James and rustle the cattle. The only problem is that James was actually Earp's older brother. And he was still alive when the gunfight took place, and he was a bartender in Tombstone.
Right.
They show when Wyatt and his brothers come and find his body, naturally he's buried, and they show Wyatt coming out to his tombstone. And it says James Earp. I don't recall what the birth date was, but his death date is 1882. It's got it right marked. We can see it plain as day in the movie, 1882. which is interesting because the gunfight, which hasn't taken place in the movie yet, took place in 1881. So there's James being murdered before the gunfight ever took place, and before Earp has even gotten involved. I mean, that's just a small part of it. In the movie, Doc Holliday is a medical doctor, and Linda Darnell, who is his girlfriend, winds up getting shot by one of the bad guys. I think it's Johnny Ringo in the film, who shoots Linda Darnell, and Dr. Holliday goes up to his room and blows the dust off of his medical bag, because of course he's a gambler. We all know Doc Holliday's a gambler and a gunfighter, and that's how he's portrayed. But gets his medical bag, comes down, and they set up a table in the saloon, and he operates. And the operation is successful at that point, but eventually Linda Darnell does die. But everybody's slapping him on the back, Dr. Holliday, and he's proud of the fact. And the only problem with that, of course, is that Dr. John H. Holliday was a dentist.
Oh, I thought he was an animal doctor.
He was a dentist. He really was a dentist. He did get a degree from a dental school, but the idea of a dentist, I mean, yeah, he knew a little medicine. Whether a dentist would have a medical bag up in his hotel room,
Unlikely.
and would perform surgery to extract a bullet, but they leave you with the impression that, well, he's called Doc Holliday. He's a doctor.
Right. Well, who was the Bat Masterson? Didn't he end up as a sports writer in St. Louis or something like that?
New York. He was a sports writer in New York and throughout the West.
Right.
He, Bat Masterson lived until about 1919 or 1920. He passed away. Earp lived till 1929. They were both long-lived men.
Right.
But Doc Holliday was not as fortunate. Doc Holliday, the portrayal of him being sick, coughing, that's true. He did love whiskey, and he was a gambler, and he was a gunfighter, but he wasn't a medical doctor. And another thing, of course, is Walter Brennan is Old Man Clanton in the film, and there was an Old Man Clanton. His name was, I think his real name was Newman Haynes Clanton was his real name. And he had a son, Ike. Ike Clanton was his son, and Billy Clanton was his son. And in the movie, Old Man Clanton and the Clantons face off against the Earps, and they all get killed. The only problem with that is that in real life, Old Man Clanton died about 2 months before the gunfight took place.
Technicalities.
He was involved. His gang had been rustling cattle, and he got involved in a gun battle, and he was killed.
That's why you have
the slightly more recent movie, I think, called Gunfight of the OK Corral with Kirk Douglas.
Oh,
I think that was a little more in line with historical
You're right.
fact.
It is a little more accurate.
A little more.
And it was made by, I think it was made in 1957.
Something like that, right?
My Darling Clementine is like 39. Burt Lancaster.
Right.
Burt Lancaster is Wyatt Earp, and they make a conscious effort in there to be accurate. I'll give you an example. There's a scene when they get to Dodge, where Earp Lancaster is sitting on the in front of the store, and next to him there's another gun. And they're both dressed black suits, ties, and there's another fellow next to him with a derby hat. And they don't exchange names or anything, but it's Bat Masterson, who in fact was with Earp in Dodge City. Masterson was younger than Earp, and it's clear that they're both lawmen. And he asks Earp if he can borrow some of his deputies. Masterson, who they don't identify, asks Wyatt if I can borrow some of your deputies, because he's got a job that he has to do out of town. Well, if you know the history, Earp was a deputy marshal in Dodge City. Bat was the sheriff of Ford County. So the idea of the sheriff asking the city marshal to borrow some of his deputies makes sense. But they don't explain any of this to you. But at least who was doing the film knew. And later in the film, Earl Holliman he plays a deputy of Earp's named Charlie Bassett, who is a younger guy than Wyatt in the movie. And he says, "Oh yeah, Bat." That's the first time you find that they acknowledge who this was. He says, "Bat took some of our deputies away." You never hear the name Masterson, though. You never hear the word Masterson in the movie. I guess they assume if you know the history, you know who Bat Masterson was.
As a kid, I always assumed that all the sheriffs in the West were U.S. Marshals.
Which, of course, they weren't. And you would have a county sheriff and a city marshal. What we'd call today a chief of police, in those days was called a marshal.
Okay.
You even see that in the statutes sometimes. Illinois statutes talk about marshals, and it's what they're referring to are city police officers.
Okay.
So it was common. You'd have a county sheriff and a city marshal who today would be called the chief of police. And
Right.
the city marshal had deputies who were his police force.
Well, what was the reason for U.S. Marshals then?
United States Marshals are federal law enforcement officers.
So they could override anybody else.
Well, not really. Not really. Although, this wasn't as well codified in those days.
Right.
This is frontier country. So if you were a United States Marshal, common thought was that makes you a cut above everybody else. I mean, you represent the big boys in Washington. Wyatt Earp was both. I mean, he was at times both a city marshal and he held a badge as a United States Marshal. Earp was a United States Marshal.
Okay, so
Deputy United States
a lot
Marshal.
of times it came down to who had a bigger gun.
That's what that's very much the case, and that kind of comes in when they get to and there again there's a in that movie a guy named Shanghai Pierce, hoorahs Dodge City. He rides into Dodge City, shooting up they're having the church social in the hall. There really was a Shanghai Pierce, so they used real names. I mentioned Charlie Bassett. In real life, Charlie Bassett was actually the town marshal, and Earp was his deputy in Dodge City. But they reverse it in the movie and make Bassett Earp's deputy. When they get to Dodge, the one big inaccuracy in the gunfight at the OK Corral is you remember that the fellow who he plays the sheriff in the movie, and he's a fellow that Earp has known, and he is the actor who portrayed Dobie Gillis's father in The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis. And he's also in It's a Wonderful Life. He's the cab driver in It's a Wonderful Life.
Okay.
Bert and Ernie. Bert and Ernie.
Bert, I think, is, yeah, Bert.
Bert and Ernie, and Ernie, Bert is the police officer, and he's Ernie, the cab driver. Okay. And I know his name. Florida Freebus played Dobie Gillis's mother. I can't think of his name. But anyway, he plays the sheriff in Tombstone, Arizona, of Cochise County. But they give him a fictitious name. He's called Cotton Wilson. Cotton Wilson. The real sheriff was a guy named Johnny Bean. Johnny Bean was the sheriff of Cochise County in Tombstone, and he was on the take with the Clantons. He was in the Clantons' pocket as this phony character, Cotton Wilson. But there's some legal problem. I think the family, Johnny Bean's heirs, have sued about his portrayal in the movies, claiming that he wasn't corrupt. And so probably to avoid any legal difficulties, the studio just decided to invent a fictitious sheriff, make him the corrupt sheriff, and not get into any legal disputes with Johnny Bean. Now, if you watch the TV series, The Life and Legend of Wyatt Earp, they used Bean's name. They had a character of Johnny Bean in the TV series.
And right now I'm thinking, where did the nickname Bat come from? What guy would want to be known as Bat?
I think it's because of the fact he did indeed carry a cane. He did indeed wear a derby hat. He had been injured. He was in a big gunfight where he was injured. Earp was never hit.
Okay.
Wyatt Earp was never so much as grazed by a bullet, from what I have read. He led a charmed life. He was a fast gun, never was hit by a bullet. Bat was injured at one point in a gunfight and needed to walk with a cane for a while. And I guess liked having the cane and did in fact carry a cane from time to time. Maybe not always the way Gene Barry did, but he did carry a cane. So I think he got the name from he would subdue enemies by literally batting them over the head.
Wow.
Earp was the same way. Earp would prefer to he was so fast he could draw his gun and whack a guy over the head with the barrel of his gun before the other guy could get the gun out of his holster. And Earp did have this thought that he wasn't out there just to run up a body count. He didn't want to kill people just because they were drunk and disorderly. And so he would prefer to disable the guy by knocking him out with a blow of the barrel of the gun rather than killing him.
Interesting.
And
That's
Bat did
when they
this.
had those buttline specials where the
buttline.
barrel was like 2 feet long.
Bat, the best explanation I've ever seen is that he would clout people over the head with his cane, and that's how he got the nickname of Bat Masters.
Going back to Dobie Gillis, who was his girlfriend's name? She was an actress which was around for a while.
Well, there was Zelda was the girl that was
Yeah.
always after him.
Who
that he
played
couldn't-
that?
I can picture the girl. I can't think of her name right off the top of my head, but the love of his life. I can't. I don't want to take up airtime. There was a girl that he was
Yeah. She was on the program.
blonde. She was a blonde, and he was always pursuing her, but never successfully.
Right.
I'll
That's
think of
what-
it during the. I'll think of it when we have our next break.
Just a couple of years ago, I saw a PBS documentary on the very likely sequence of events in the actual gunfight at the OK Corral.
Right.
Very well done. Very well done. And it's very complex. It's not somebody shooting 5 people at one time. There's a lot of give and take as to the outcome of that.
And that brings up a thought. If you see the gunfight at the OK Corral in My Darling Clementine, it's like an infantry battle. I mean, it goes on. I mean, it's about it runs a considerable time, and they're running here and shooting there, and this guy ducks behind that barn, and he's in reality the gunfight at the OK Corral took about 30 seconds. It was like there were 4 Earps. There was Wyatt, Morgan, Virgil, and Doc Holliday, and that's usually portrayed accurately. There were only the 4 of them on the side of law and order. And you had Ike Clanton was there, Billy Clanton was there, the McClowrys, Tom McClowry. There were 2 McClowrys, Tom and I think maybe Jack McClowry. And there were 5. There were a total of 5 on the other side. The story is that Ike Clanton ducked out. Ike Clanton was kind of AWOL. He was there when the fight started, but he quickly hightailed it out and survived. Billy Clanton was killed. Tom and Frank McClowry were killed. And I think there was one other. I don't know. There was a guy named Brocious who was a McClowry. But anyway, they were all. What happened was the 4 Earps squared off against the 5 on the Clanton side, who were not all Clantons because the 2 McClowrys were there, and they simply draw their guns and fired like 2 lines of battleships exchanging.
Right.
They kept firing until all the Clantons were down.
Right.
But the battle was actually on the main street of.
It wasn't literally in the
Right.
corral.
It was on the main street of town.
Yeah, it was in kind of off to the side of the corral was there.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's why they did
A couple of them might have been shot in the corral later on
Yeah.
toward the end of the fight. But the
Ike
street was
Clanton
the main source,
survived.
yeah.
Some say it was like a camera shop next door, and Ike apparently ducked into that. And so Ike Clanton, who is sometimes portrayed as Old Man Clanton, but that's not accurate. There was an Old Man Clanton. Ike was his oldest son. But Billy Clanton winds up dead. Tom and Frank McClowry wind up dead. There was one other gunman who winds up dead. Doc is not hit. Wyatt is not hit, but the 2 brothers are both wounded in the fight. Virgil and Morgan are both wounded. So that part, but the notion of this is kind of a running gun battle,
Right.
Which in the movie, the gunfight at the OK Corral, they chase Billy Clanton into a shop, if you may remember. Wyatt
sure.
catches him in a shop, and finally Doc. Well, none of that happened. It was all over, as I say, within about 30 to 40 seconds of just continuous gunfire.
I don't know if it was a movie they were shooting, but they were showing outtakes, and there was a gun battle on the main street of town, and all of a sudden you hear a siren coming. Remember that guy was in the highway patrol?
Well, Broderick Crawford.
Yeah, he comes flying through the town, right through the shot.
Comedy version of the Old West.
He was interesting actor.
Yeah.
And somebody in the background says, "Tell him 10-4."
They did another movie about it called Hour of the Gun with James Garner. First time that James Garner played Wyatt Earp.
Really?
Did you ever
And-
see that guy in person? I think he was 7 feet tall. He was really tall.
Yeah.
He was in the first Grand Prix.
Oh, okay.
And that was one of the better movies I've seen, mostly because of the music. But they had some of the original Grand Prix drivers, and I would think they would have to make a car bigger so he could get in there. But he
That
was,
big of a fellow, eh? Huh.
oh, well, maybe he was 6'6" or something like that. And he actually did like racing. He was at Indianapolis.
So did Steve McQueen. I think Steve McQueen was a car
Right,
racer.
right. Yeah, he was at Indianapolis quite a bit. I don't know about Daytona, but a lot of drag racing and stuff like that. So,
One Western I think we are all familiar with that's given almost universal acclaim, but I'm wondering, maybe, John, you could nitpick it a little bit, High Noon.
Oh, High Noon.
It
Sure.
reflected the early period of the Cold War, too.
Well, that's often read
But-
backwards
but
into it, yeah.
I think it's read too much into it, yeah.
Yeah, it's, of course, and that's a completely fictional story, so you're not dealing with historical inaccuracies, because that's just a totally made-up story. The only real anecdote I know about that was that John Wayne, who was a good friend of Gary Cooper, was very, very strongly opposed to that final scene where Cooper takes off his star and throws it
sounds
into
familiar.
the dirt. Wayne thought he told Cooper, you should not. I don't know if it was after the fact or if he did it when they were under discussion, but he said, you should not do this. Throwing the star into the dirt is like throwing the American flag into the dirt. To him, the
Interesting
star was a symbol of law and
Authority.
order
Yeah.
and the Constitution and the idea of a lawman, he's a dedicated lawman, and throwing that star into the street. Wayne was
interesting.
completely against that.
Yeah.
I mean, other than that, I mean, it's a fictionalized story. I after the fact, all these people in the 50s, they always say this was about McCarthyism. Well, maybe they thought so. Maybe the writers thought so, but I watched that movie. I wasn't thinking about Joe McCarthy when I was watching them. I don't think anybody else was either.
Exactly.
So if they want to claim that, I've heard any number of films. I was watching a narration of Ben-Hur, and they were claiming that Ben-Hur was about McCarthyism. My God, that was
59 version that we all know and love with Charlton Heston.
that was written by Lew Wallace in the 19th century. The story was written after the Civil War, for God's sakes. McCarthy hadn't even been born when that story was written. So, I mean, some of these Hollywood types, I mean, they've got Joe McCarthy on the brain. I mean, it's half
that
a
was
century.
one of the major political events going on in the late 40s, early 50s.
Well, according
Half
to
a
that,
century
didn't
later,
color
that's all they
everything.
think about is McCarthy.
given that, they might have a Western based on what's going on now.
People go to a movie to see a Western. They're not thinking about what's going on.
No,
in
it's for
politics.
entertainment, period.
Then you could always raise the subject, too, of how Native Americans were portrayed in Westerns over the years. You were starting to get Westerns in the 50s starring Jimmy Stewart with a little bit of even-handedness. Jeff Chandler as Cochise.
Yeah.
Things like that. So it's not only recently that we decided to portray the Indians so-called as other than bad guys.
I've been watching as a kid. I loved the Wyatt Earp TV series. They rerun them at breakfast time, and I've been watching them and catching up on it. And it amazes me how historically accurate that series was. They really made an effort. Now, some of the sources they use, people call into question the historical source, but it's based on books that were written. A lot of names that as a kid I thought were just all made up, and I found out there really were political figures. The mayor of Dodge City, Mayor Kelly. There really was a Mayor Kelly of Dodge City, and this Shanghai Pierce that I mentioned. They portrayed Indians very favorably, and this is 1955. That show went on the air. Earp had two good friends who were Indians who would scout for him and warn him of things that were happening, and they even touched on the battle at the Little Bighorn. There was an episode in which Wyatt Earp meets Mrs. Custer and takes her to meet an Indian who was an eyewitness and tells her what he saw. And tells her that her husband had, in fact, died very heroically, which we do believe. That I think that modern history is that George Custer may well have been one of the last men to die.
Could have
where
been.
they go out and they
they
study
could
where the
recreate that, yeah.
where the various where the bullets were and
Right.
various accounts. But in any way, the Indians were treated very, fairly. There are Indians who are hotheads and who are violent. There are also Indians who are decent and want to live together with the white population. So they do it it's an even-handed approach. The Indians are not all good, but they're not all bad.
Right.
They're treated
No
as-
group is.
And that went on from when
right.
the Pilgrims first landed in Plymouth in the first settlement. Some of them got along with the Indians, and some of them didn't.
Yeah, at the beginning they did. Yeah, the Thanksgiving, at Plymouth, the Indians were the guests of honor. They brought all sorts of food for the
Right.
colonists, and venison,
And they taught them how to survive, pretty much.
how to grow corn. So I said they taught them how corn could be grown
Right.
in the New World, which was a new crop to them. They weren't familiar with
Right.
corn. So
One thing I'm thinking of some of the very early westerns, maybe not quite Tom Mix, the costumes. Oh, pardon me, gentlemen. It's now time for yet another intermission. We'll be right back.
Well, friends, it's that time of the year again when you want to check your roof, siding, and gutters and make sure they're in great shape in case we have any bad weather. You may want to check the roof, siding, and gutters on your home and make sure that they are in good shape. You don't want mold or mildew in your attic or crawl space, or drip, drip, drip on the ceilings in your rooms, or have your walls damaged by leaky gutter or bad siding. So don't have double expense. Sooner or later, you're going to have to get it repaired. So why not call Besh Brothers Roofing, Siding, and Gutters at area code 630-616-1359. Mike Besh will drive over in his shiny red truck with ladders on top, and Mike will look over your roof, siding, and gutters and give you an estimate and go from there. So once again, don't have double expense. Call Besh Brothers Roofing, Siding, and Gutters for a free estimate at area code 630-616-1359. That's Besh Brothers Roofing, Siding, and Gutters at area code 630-616-1359. Call today for a free estimate. That's Besh Brothers Roofing, Siding, and Gutters, 630-616-1359 for a free estimate. 630-616-1359. Besh Brothers Roofing, Siding, and Gutters.
Now back to our discussion. John?
Well, we're back again. We're in our final segment, our final 30 minutes of Meet the Chicago Historians for the month of May in this year of our Lord 2018. We're at the end of the Easter season, ended yesterday. Pentecost Sunday is the official end of the Easter season in the church, and that came to a close. We're now in the final month of spring. This is the 21st, so 1 month from today will be the 21st of June, which is customarily on or about the beginning of summer. So we're in our final
21st, I think, is the infernal equinox or something like
right.
that.
So 1 month from today we will be some people think of Memorial Day as the beginning of summer, and that's just a week away. This coming next, in fact, a week from today. Will be Memorial Day.
Some consider the first big summer holiday weekend.
And that was originally Decoration Day by what, Lincoln?
No, not that. That all came about after Lincoln had been assassinated. That came about in the aftermath of the Civil War.
Okay.
When primarily ladies, would decorate the graves of the fallen soldiers, and it happened in a number of places. There are a number of towns that claim to be the birthplace of the decoration of graves that became Memorial Day, but
Right.
several of them were in the South, and the story that made the newspaper was that these ladies had decorated the graves of the fallen soldiers, and they had also they had not limited themselves to decorating the graves of the Southerners. They had put flowers on the graves of the Union soldiers that were buried there, which was well received in the North, and it led to the beginnings of other towns doing the same thing.
Right.
And for that reason, it came to be known as Decoration Day because of the decoration of the graves. But it's considered one of the steps in the reconciliation of North and South.
I remember in Oak Park they had, I think they still call it Decoration Day, probably in the 50s somewhere.
When I was a kid, my mom and dad always called it Decoration Day.
Right, and they had a parade where kids with bicycles put flags on them and all this kind of stuff.
Sure.
And they had other stuff, but that's pretty much what it was. And I always like Memorial Day now because it's kind of low-key in the 4th of July and even Labor Day to a certain extent.
Big event.
It's not like Christmas and Thanksgiving. Well, Thanksgiving, it's not commercialized.
Thanksgiving is sort of a low-key version of Christmas in a way. You know,
right. But, I mean, it's, there's no emphasis on if I want a Christmas present, I got to give somebody else one. And if you want to sit and watch the ball game, or if you want to listen to Indianapolis, or do nothing, just sit and enjoy the fresh air, that's fine.
I remember as a kid when they and I think they do the Indianapolis 500 now is it on the Sunday before Memorial Day, or do they do it on the actual Memorial Day?
I think it's on the Sunday, only to keep Memorial Day as a backup
in case it rains.
Right.
But I mean, I remember when I was a kid. Of course, you remember when Memorial Day was always the 30th of May.
Right.
It wasn't the Monday holiday.
Right. Well, they did that for.
And
I don't say political, but
the Indianapolis 500 was on Memorial Day, and it wasn't on television. I remember as a kid, I remember reading about it. I remember as a kid, it would be in the newspaper. You'd read about it.
Right.
And you could put the radio on.
Right. WTAQ in LaGrange.
Yeah. But you wouldn't know until later in the day who won. You couldn't watch it on television.
But the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is not in Indianapolis. It's in Speedway, Indiana.
Yeah, it's actually on the
Okay.
It's near Indianapolis.
It's close.
It's surrounded by Indianapolis.
Yeah.
But and actually,
it
it almost ended up in Forest Park because where the ordnance plant used to be.
Oh, sure.
There was a site between Des Plaines Avenue and Harlem, in Roosevelt, and 26th Street. And I can't remember who built the first one. He had his choice between the two of them, and he ended up with Indianapolis. Actually, they had a board track in Forest Park, a wooden board track for racing cars. And that killed more people than anybody.
Oh, God.
And they had Heinz. It was in Heinz, Illinois.
Oh, okay.
It was because Heinz Lumber built the board track.
I always like watching the opening of the Indianapolis 500 with all the military. They have a flyover. They usually have a B-2 bomber fly over, and they have all the military. They play the national. They have a very stirring version of the national anthem.
Right.
And then for years they would have Jim Neighbors would sing "Back Home Again" in Indiana.
It's very good.
I don't know who they had, because he passed away about a year or two ago.
You're just gonna say it's a year and a half ago.
Right.
And he did it right. I'm sure his health was failing, but he did it for the last time about maybe 2 or 3 years before he died. And they announced that this will be his final appearance. And he looked good.
Right.
But probably
that guy was a giant too.
Yeah.
But I think
that was a
one of
tradition.
them, what's her name? She was on that family, the Partridge Family.
Oh, Shirley Jones.
No, it wasn't there.
Oh.
Shirley Jones is the Partridge Family. What are you thinking of?
The one who sang the Back Home Again in Indianapolis.
Oh, this past year?
Yeah. Florence Henderson?
Florence Henderson has since died.
Well, there goes that one out.
It might. I think you're right. I can't recall who it was. It might have been Shirley Jones.
So they might have different people doing it
now. It might have been Shirley Jones. One year, I think they had kind of like a choir. They didn't have one single singer. They had a school choir or something.
Right.
But it'd be interesting to see this
and
year.
it's still considered a brickyard because the start-finish line is 36 inches wide.
Brick, yeah.
John, pursuing your topic of stressing historical inaccuracies in movies especially, anything else that comes to mind, like a movie where it takes place in World War II and you see jet airplanes, or it's the it's the Roman Empire and somebody's got tire tracks on the road? Things like that fascinate me, but I'm having trouble
that's
thinking
a little bit. That's just a blooper. I mean, that would be just a.
It's not a historical inaccuracy.
Inaccuracy. It's something stupid like. Charlton Heston was claiming that there's a myth that in Ben-Hur, when they're doing the race, there's a myth that in one shot you can see his wristwatch on his hand. But that's not true, because he's wearing these big gauntlet gloves, and he says it's just a fictitious myth that is
actually
created.
The Germans did use fighter planes at the very end of the Second World War.
Well, they had the Germans. So did the British. The British had the Gloucester Meteor.
But they never developed it. It never came out during the war.
No, the Gloucester Meteor flew during the war. The British. Oh yeah,
okay.
Yeah. The Gloucester Meteor shot. They were shooting down V1s with their jet aircraft. The Gloucester.
Well, I heard P-51s.
You don't hear much about
this. They were going
surprising.
so slow. The P-51s would fly up behind them and knock off the gyroscope.
The ME-262 was. I mean, they were P-51 shot down at Messerschmitt 262s. There was
they only flew at maybe 100 miles an hour.
There were engagements. There was one engagement, I think, in February of '45, where they sent up a whole swarm of ME-262, the jets, and about over half of them were shot down. I mean, they were not invincible. The notion that, oh boy, if the Germans had it was. Its edge on the P-51 was not that great. It had an edge, but it wasn't that great.
Right.
And we had a jet plane. We had the what would be called the P-80 was in development, and it just missed the war. And if we had needed it, I mean, they could have rushed that thing in production. They would have flooded. We would have had 10 of them for every Messerschmitt 262.
Was it F-86?
The F-86 was later. This was
during the Korean War.
This was the P-80. I think it was sometimes called the Shooting Star. It was a straight wing plane. It didn't have the swept back plane.
Short wings.
And any evidence that the Japanese were working on jet planes, or with their industry so decimated? Maybe not.
I'm not familiar with any Japanese jets, but we had the P-80 in development. We flew. I think the first one flew in 1940 or 41. It was being. We just didn't feel a need for it. There was no sense that this was urgent.
And the English did.
By the time the Germans were actually deploying the Messerschmitt 262, the war was practically over. I mean, it was too late.
Right.
I mean, they didn't have a lot of them available until 45, and by that point, everybody knew the war was. There was no urgency that we had to do a crash program to get jet planes to Europe, because the war was going to be over by the time they got there.
They said Japan was within, I'm thinking, 90 days of making a bomber operational that would go to the West Coast.
Wow.
Yeah,
because they were so decimated
at the end of the war, and they had one of them.
The Germans were too.
Right,
so they had one of them. I mean, so they would have had one plane that would have been probably shot down over
but
the Hawaiian
if they had an
Islands.
atomic bomb in it.
No, they didn't. Yeah, but they didn't. They were Japan was.
They were within. They said a month or two of making it operational.
The plane.
No, the bomb too, from what I understand.
No, Japan was nowhere near.
Maybe it was Germany.
Germany was nowhere. Nobody was anywhere near the atomic bomb, other than.
But what Japan was doing is they got balloons, and they supposedly had nerve gas or something like that.
No, they had incendiaries in them, and one or two of them made it to the West Coast. There were actually 2 Americans killed, I think, in not on the coast but inland by one of these balloon bombs. It started a little fire, and there were 2 Americans, I think, that were killed.
Well, maybe they were playing with nerve gas.
They floated, I don't know how many hundreds of these, and most of them just blew off course or went into the ocean.
Right.
A few of them made it to the West Coast, and they started a couple of fires, but it didn't amount to anything.
What was it? Was it yesterday? Was an anniversary of what's his name going across the Atlantic?
Lindbergh?
Lindbergh, yeah.
Might have been. I'm not sure the date of that. It could well be.
I think it was. I think you're right. It was in yesterday's paper. I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
It was
Maybe
some
27th. That
anniversary.
sounds right.
Yeah.
Landed at Le Bourget.
Right. And
Airport.
everybody thought he was lost
Yeah.
until he went across
Yeah.
Ireland,
Yeah.
and they saw him, and then they, I don't know, phoned against him or
Story.
set up smoke signals or something, told him.
There are all these thousands of people that came out to the airport, and in the movies they're shouting, Lindbergh! Lindbergh! Lindbergh!
And they pretty much tore the plane apart from what I
Yeah,
understand.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's in
The Smithsonian.
Smithsonian.
Yeah.
Is
And,
there any evidence, we wonder, that at the very end of the war, some German generals might have wanted to try to use a stock of poison gas to turn the tide? Whether we know that after World War One, it was seen not very as successful.
I think virtually all the German generals before or right around when Hitler killed himself, all the German generals were gone too.
But-
there was
well-
one of them. He was
Well,
last ditch effort.
what was his name? Mengele? No,
Mengele
no,
was-
Mengele. He was caught later
that
on.
was he was one of the prison
But who was the
thugs that
in
were.
Argentina.
He was the thing of the Luftwaffe,
Well, Hermann Goering was the head of the Luftwaffe.
and he was on trial.
Yeah, he was the
And
biggest of the
then he got
Nazis
some
to survive.
some kind of poison and took it, and they found him dead. in
I
his,
think cyanide. He had
Yeah.
a cyanide capsule. He committed suicide. But no, in answer to your question, the thinking has always been that Hitler, who was gassed in World War One,
Right.
never showed any interest in using poison gas on the battlefield. Now, our press secretary got into trouble last year, Trump's press secretary, when,
yes.
when he said that the Germans didn't use poison gas in World War II.
Right,
And
it was
of
their
course,
choice
what
not
he
to,
meant
yeah.
was they didn't use it as a combat weapon. They didn't use it on the battle. Well, of course, sure, they used poison gas to exterminate millions of people
That was
Sure
the
they
point.
did.
in in Auschwitz and elsewhere. But I mean, I felt at the time he got a bad rap because I understood. I think most people understood he was talking about on the battlefield. They didn't use
combat.
poison gas against the Allies. The thinking has always been that Hitler, because of the fact that he had been gassed, just had an aversion to gas. I've never seen any indication that they thought of using it. They had stockpiles of it. They had a gas called Tabun, which was much more powerful than anything that was used in World War One.
Really? Now that's
Right.
The Tabun. yeah.
What was it they used it was a mixture or something in the
World War One?
World War II.
It was called Zyklon B.
Yeah,
that's it.
Gas they used in the camps.
and they got him in because
Zyklon
it looked like
B.
a shower room,
Yeah.
and they locked him in
That
there.
was
And,
In World War One, the first gas they used was chlorine in 1915, and then they went to eventually they were using mustard gas. There were all kinds of gases that were being there. Were other gases that were
Right.
used in World War.
Well, they couldn't control the direction
One.
of the wind that well.
Yeah, there's the thinking was that if they had used it effectively the first time, it could have had a dramatic effect on the war. But because no one had ever used gas before, they didn't know how to deploy it.
right.
They didn't use it effectively. They weren't prepared. They didn't have
Yeah.
troops ready to follow up.
Right.
There's something that it could have been a decisive weapon in 1915 if it had been used properly,
Yeah.
but it wasn't. Thankfully, from the Allies' point of view, it wasn't used properly. Churchill, it is said, was prepared to use poison gas on the landing beaches if the Germans had invaded England. He would have used gas to stop.
Any last ditch effort.
Yeah, of course. I mean, if the British Isles were being invaded. Now, I've read this. I've never seen specific, but it's probably the kind of thing that there wouldn't be records kept of it anyway. It's probably just something that he said in private in a
Right.
meeting or something. But everybody had it. We had it. Everybody had stockpiles of gas ready to go if the other side used it.
How about the Japanese?
I don't.
If
again,
we
I
had
don't-
attacked their home islands.
Again, I've
Yeah.
never read about gas in terms of Japan. They were prepared to fight to the last ditch.
That's true.
It's
Right.
not inconceivable that they would have used gas, but I've never seen any reference
Yeah.
to it. You read about them training women to fight with sharp stakes
Children.
Right.
Yeah.
and tossing Molotov cocktails and that sort of thing. I've never seen any reference to gas as
What
being one of the
island
things
was
they
it
might
that
use.
we invaded and the women and children were jumping off the
Okinawa.
cliffs? Okinawa. Okay.
Okinawa.
Now that's a Japanese. They turned it back to Japanese.
Oh
now?
yeah. Okinawa is probably sort of the same relation to the Japanese home islands that Hawaii would have for us. It was like the last stop before
Right.
you get to the Japanese home
Right,
islands.
and that's where they had
And that was where, at the end,
The B-29s
Japanese,
took off
they
from.
were jumping off cliffs, again, because they had been told by
Right.
their leaders that the Americans were going to rape and loot and pillage and kill and,
Right.
and brutal. And that's all they knew was what their government told them, and they believed it.
Right.
Sure.
So, yeah. Which is, I mean, the bloodbath, if they had invaded the main islands, it would, it
Right.
would have been horrendous. I mean, we've talked about that in the past, the casualties there would have been. But it's funny, I'm going to look that up, 'cause I've never seen, they don't talk about gas in relation to Japan. You read about
This
it
is true. Yeah.
in Europe, in the European theater, because everybody had it, and because it was used in Europe in World War I.
I'm sure the Russians had it.
Oh, I'm sure they did.
Yeah,
I'm sure they did.
But the
Yeah.
Russians, what did they lose? 20 million troops during the Second World War?
I'm sure nobody, I'm sure no one knows
I know
the exact number.
Of all the, if you want to
They're
call them
casual.
allies, they lost the most, right?
They lost, but again,
Amen.
in fairness, they lost as many troops due to the incompetence of Joseph Stalin as a
Right.
supreme
Well, that's
commander, as
Right.
they lost because of the the onslaught of the Nazis.
Right.
Stalin was if he wasn't the worst supreme commander in history, he'd be in the running for the title. He's
Well, yeah.
and the generals. I mean, I've read there were generals that just loathed Stalin. It was obviously you couldn't even express the slightest doubt about him, or you'd wind up either shot or in Siberia.
Right.
But
Or shot in Siberia.
he had no military knowledge whatsoever. He had absolutely zero military. He'd never served in the army. He had been in command during the Civil War as a communist big shot. But
Well, him and
had-
Hitler were both micromanagers.
oh yeah,
Everything
Yeah,
he had to go
that's good.
through. I mean, if some general had to go to the bathroom,
Yeah.
we had to get it through.
but Hitler,
It's kinda-
Hitler at least, he at least had been a corporal, which was more than Stalin had ever been. And Stalin, he makes himself a marshal. He makes himself a marshal of the Soviet
was his
Union
rank,
at the beginning of the war.
Yeah.
After the war was over, he wasn't satisfied with that, so he conferred upon himself an even higher rank of generalissimo. His final rank was generalissimo, which meant like supreme over even the marshals. And for the rest of he always wore. He designed a new uniform. And in fact, when he died, and they laid him in the mausoleum, he was wearing the uniform of a generalissimo.
Is that the one they kept them refrigerated for
Yeah.
so many years?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Wasn't
Lenin
that a
still-
title
Lenin
that
still is.
Franco took upon himself?
Franco was generalissimo. There were three in World
Great
War.
sounding titles.
Franco was generalissimo, and Chiang Kai-shek was
okay.
also generalissimo. It means like general.
You're head
the
of all the
most.
general. You're just
General
you're
the
number
most,
uno,
the supreme
numero uno.
general.
Yeah,
general. It's Latin, generalissimus. You are the general above all the generals.
Which one of
Great
the Axis countries in the Second World War was trying to get Mexico as a...
World War One.
was it
This is Civil
World
War.
Germany.
This is Civil War.
No, it was one of the World Wars.
Oh, the Zimmerman telegram.
The Zimmerman
Yeah,
telegram.
that-
World
yeah,
War One.
yeah,
The German
yeah.
Foreign Office.
one of the,
And I think without the knowledge of the Kaiser, they sent this message to the Mexico. That,
they wanted to join the Axis.
Make war with us. Make war together. Make peace together.
Yeah.
And Mexico will get back California, Arizona, and New Mexico.
Right,
That's
in
tempting.
Chicago.
Yeah,
Chicago.
that was.
Not them.
It was actually that probably was that was like the straw that broke the camel's back. That was the decisive factor probably in the United States declaring war. That was the last straw. They always talk about the submarines. And the
Even more than
ships.
unrestricted subwarfare.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
That was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the last straw when and the British intercepted it and saw to it that it was publicized. I mean, we didn't intercept
Can't imagine
it.
why.
The British Secret Service intercepted that and made sure it got to Washington as quickly as possible. And that was the last straw. And Arthur Zimmerman was the German Foreign Secretary, and it was probably because at that point there were those in the German government who were not eager to push the United States into war, and there were those that were against the unrestricted submarine warfare because they were afraid it would tip the United States into war. When this
But
happened,
what was
it
it?
ended his career. I mean, he was dumped from his position because of that.
After Pearl Harbor, you talk about World War I. World War II, 2 or 3 days later, they declared war on the U.S.
Yeah. They declared war on the 11th of Pearl Harbor.
You know,
3 days after we declared war on Japan, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States.
What got me is
Would that make much of a tactical difference if they hadn't? I wonder.
Well,
I wonder.
they had.
Would have been a terrific. Well, imagine if they hadn't. We would have had no reason to declare war on Germany at that point.
True.
People were enraged at Japan.
Sure.
Congress, everybody wanted to deal with Japan. If they had simply sat there and done nothing, it's hard to see where Roosevelt could have justified asking for a declaration of war on Germany
Right.
in the absence
That's a
of
good point.
something.
Yeah.
He did the best they could
Yeah.
because him and Churchill were pretty good buddies.
And the problem is that there would have been those in Congress who would have said, well, we got to scale back on our aid to the British because now we got to concentrate on defeating Japan.
Right.
I mean, it was probably the greatest, I consider it the greatest blunder that Hitler, of the many blunders that Hitler made.
One
The
is
supreme blunder was declaring war
well,
on the United
we
States.
made
We didn't have to.
a big one too. How many months did German submarines have full
Free run?
rain
For,
on
for,
the East
for too
Coast?
long. For too
How
long.
many ships? Like
Many
400
more.
ships they
1941,
sunk.
yeah.
For long. You know, we had,
And
yeah, it's,
you know they invited them over because the East Coast they never did a blackout,
well,
and you could see these ships behind it, the silhouette, and all you did was
Congress had no interest in defense spending all during the 1930s. We didn't have the ships. We didn't have the
that was after
destroyers.
Pearl
We-
Harbor though.
yeah, but what I'm saying, you can't build a destroyer in 2 days. You know,
No, it took about
the
15.
The mistake was made that we hadn't armed ourselves, particularly when the war began in '39. And even in '39, we don't start gearing up.
Yeah, like we
It
were
isn't
what,
until France
the
falls in
11th or
1940.
12th biggest army in the world or something like that.
Oh, we were way at the bottom. We had
Yeah.
we had 100,000 men in the army in 1939.
But we could never
We had
do
only
that.
about 250,000 by 1941.
We could never do that again now because we don't have the means of producing all that stuff.
Oh.
The industrial supply.
If we had to, I'm sure.
I think
I'm
we
an
could.
optimist. I think we could. But as far as the naval thing, you know, a lot of the blame goes to Congress. Nobody nobody wanted to hear about defense spending in the 1930s. Nobody wanted to spend money on the Army and the Navy.
That's right.
If Roosevelt had proposed added defense spending in 36 or 37 or 38, they would have been thrown him out of office.
Yeah.
No one wanted to
it
spend
was
it.
just
You
what?
created a lot of jobs by
A number of
defense
years
spending.
ago-
I've often thought that.
They
The
vindicated Short and who was the other general?
Admiral Kimmel, and
Right, and I don't know if they court-martialed them, but I mean, all they were
no,
doing
they
was
weren't court-martialed.
they were probably cleaning
relieved.
toilets somewhere.
Their career was ended. They,
You're right.
they were both. They were out of the
Not even
service.
demoted.
But
Yeah.
it turned out they never knew about it.
They were.
Because somebody, it was on a weekend and they just threw it in the.
They were never.
bin.
They were never actually. To this day, it's kind. There was talk a few years ago about like retroactively retroactively.
I think they did.
No, it's still controversial. There are still
I
those.
thought it was a few years ago. Congress
I'm not certain.
restored
they,
them.
They had talked about
Restored
They
their
talked
rank or
about
something
it.
like that.
It's been talked about, but I don't think it's ever been done.
Okay.
There are those who feel that in spite of everything else, somebody has to take the blame for a
That's right.
disaster of that type.
In the federal government,
the
nobody wants
well,
to.
the tradition is the field commander has to take the blame.
as long
It's
as
like
they
in
know about
baseball, when the club doesn't perform, they fire the manager.
it. Right.
They don't fire the owner because he didn't give the manager sufficient players to win games.
Right.
The owner doesn't fire himself.
Right.
They fire the manager.
But
you know.
from what I understand, those two generals, they never even got word of it.
They were warned. They were warned. They were warned to be on the lookout. Short had all of his planes clustered together
Yeah.
because he was afraid of sabotage.
What was the name of that airfield?
Hickam.
Hickam.
That's right.
Hickam Field and Wheeler Field.
And
Two-
the
two
Japanese
airfields.
screwed up too because one, they never got the oil fields,
Yeah.
and there was another one they never got. And I can't remember what it was.
No, the machine shops. They also
Yeah.
they didn't hit the machine
So-
shops and the repair
To
facilities.
repair, yeah.
We're coming up on pretty
Oh, it's
close to
almost
the
that
end.
time, yeah.
Let's once again have an introduction of our two remaining guests. Would you like to give us a final indication of who's been speaking today?
Oh, finally, Don Peter from Oak Park.
Rich Lang, your announcer.
And John Escacholco, your host, sitting in for Jack Ryan. It's been good to be here at the John DeVita Broadcast Center today. This is our May program. Before I turn it over to our announcer, I want to wish you all a very blessed and a very fine Memorial Day.
Right.
Let's honor all those who have served and fought and died in defense of this greatest of all nations in the world in our armed forces, from the War of Independence to all the wars of today.
Hear, hear, John. Hear, hear.
Yes.
And we especially this year honor those who died in the First World War. We mark the 100th anniversary of World War I
Right.
this year in November. And also, I always like to honor my dad and all the GIs who served and fought in the Second World War. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rich Lang.
Thank you, John. We wish to thank Kevin of Jack FM, WRHS 89.7 FM, for broadcasting our shows over the Ridgewood Radio Network. Recordings of previous Meet the Chicago Historians programs are available for your listening pleasure via the internet at www.windycityhometown.com. We want to pay special thank you to the executive producer of the Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network, John Seconda. On behalf of everyone associated with our Historians program, we thank you for listening. This is your announcer, Rich Lang. So long, until next time.
You have been listening to Meet the Chicago Historians on the Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network on Monday, May the 21st, the year 2018. This program was produced by Jack Ryan and directed by John DeVito. And once again, our special thanks to the executive producer of Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network, Mr. John Seconda. This program was recorded on Monday, May the 21st, the year 2018. Until next time, be safe and thanks for listening.